Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Hope everyone's doing okay. So, I was thinking about the last video that I made, which I haven't posted yet because I'm trying to have a set of videos ready before I post the first one. But I was thinking about the last video and I was thinking how I could pull threads or like how I could build upon it to get to where I want to get to with it because, I thought about jumping in and doing a video about psyops that are going on now in other countries or like color revolutions. But then I realized there's a lot of stuff that you would need to know in between all that. So we've gone really far back in time. And this video is going to be about spycraft in the ancient world. And I have a whole thing in my mind about how all this is going to build on each other and connect over a series of videos. And so I thought it was really important to learn about intelligence and how intelligence has been shaped throughout time. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to start with the ancient world in this video, and we're just going to build up into future videos that will go over like some history. We'll go over the Cold War, why after World War II, why things got put into place, and worldviews. We're going to talk about how they shape what's going on in our world today. And we're going to get eventually to Epstein, because I see that everywhere I go, people are shouting about the Epstein stuff. And it's like, you guys don't even realize what it is or have any kind of critical thinking around it, which I find bizarre because all that was brought to light years and years ago and nobody seemed to care then. So, and there's like actually quite a lot to know. But I never see anybody, like nobody seems to know any of the stuff. So it kind of blows my mind. So that's eventually we're going to get to a place where it's modern times and we're going to go over that because I know a lot of information about that. And I also think that there's like some lacking critical skills, like questions we should be asking in regards to that nobody really is. They're just saying, release the Epstein files like banshees all over the internet. And that's a psyop, like not the situation itself, but the way that it's being portrayed into the public. But you won't know that unless you know these things about intelligence and why it's gathered and how it works. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's get into it. So I actually made these really cool boards. Hopefully you guys can see this. I hope it's big enough. So I've got some quotes here. Knowledge is power, a quote from Sun Tzu. He was a very famous strategist in China, a theorist and a strategist who wrote the book, The Art of War. Quote by Sun Tzu: "One who knows the enemy and knows himself will not be endangered in 100 engagements." And so what does that mean? It means you need to know what's going on, every aspect, every facet, to know what is worth engaging in. That way you're not entangled in a bunch of things that you don't need to be, and then you're lacking somewhere else. So it's an interesting quote. And he was around, it was like the 4th or 5th century. There were different dates. We're actually going way into the past than the 5th century. Okay, so ancient intelligence topics: civilizations, history of intelligence and espionage. We're going to talk about ancient Syria and Iraq, ancient Egypt, Hittite and Hebrew, ancient Persia, Greece, and Rome. And our objectives, what are we learning about today, are intelligence, terminology and definitions, overview of intelligence and espionage in different cultures, video viewing and learning. So we're going to watch some videos together. And then this is really interesting. We're going to be doing a deep dive into what the Oracle of Delphi and the other vast network of oracles really were. And then we're going to watch these videos here that you see over here. And then important ancient writings that we'll go over is 5th century BC, Sun Tzu, The Art of War, Arthashtra of the 1st century AD, and the 15th century BC, so way, way back, Armana letters. And we're also going to go over some stuff they found in Syria and Iraq. I have a bunch of articles we're going to go over, and this one's just sort of like a basic fun one before we start. Okay, and it's from the Spy Museum. So, what is an agent? An agent is another word for a spy, someone who volunteers or is recruited to pass secrets to an intelligence agency, sometimes taking risks to spy on their own country. They may be recruited through money, ideology, coercion, greed, or for any other reason, such as love. They trust their handler, a professional intelligence officer, to protect them. Double agent, someone who works for both sides. So, the definition of intelligence is the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. So, the intelligence cycle is planning, decision makers, task an intelligence agency to acquire information on certain topics or specific issues of concern. Collection, processing, analysis, and dissemination. Espionage is defined as the act of spying or using spies, agents, assets, and intelligence officers, as well as technology, to collect secret information, usually through illegal means. And there is actually an Espionage Act that was passed shortly after the US entered World War I, and it imposes heavy penalties for spying or any activities that weaken or imperiled the country's defense. So there's economic espionage, which is the clandestine gathering of information from an economic competitor. Governments throughout history have stolen ideas, formulas, and technology to undercut rivals or borrow innovations. For millennia, China was a major target with its silk, tea, and porcelain manufacturing secrets. Today, it's the U.S. world's largest investor in research and development. It's often easier to steal someone else's technology, for example, than to develop it yourself. Spies are recruited via an approach or pitch through a case officer. So that's interesting. So that was just a basic thing. But I do have definitions we're going to go over. So Sun Tzu, in his Art of War, stressed the need for the following roles for a functional intelligence program. So, spy roles: secret information, an agent in place, the penetration agent, the disinformation agent, and then different organizational roles that's needed for intelligence are counterintelligence, double agents, psychological warfare, and the use of information to design active subversion. And this last one is really important for us to know because this really affects us quite a bit. Here we have the definition of secret agent or agent in place. And we're going to, like I said, go way back farther in time than Sun Tzu, but I thought we would go over the different terms and define them before we do because it's very much all the same, even going way far back. So, a secret informant in intelligence is an individual who provides privileged, concealed, or secret information about a person or organization to an intelligence agency, often a government or law enforcement body, typically through a confidential relationship that protects their identity from public discourse. An agent in place refers to an operative who is secretly embedded within an organization, community, or nation on behalf of another entity, such as a government or intelligence agency, to gather intelligence, provide strategic information, or carry out specific tasks. The penetration agent is basically a mole. In intelligence, a penetration agent is an individual who is recruited by an intelligence service to infiltrate a target organization, often with the goal of acquiring information or influencing its activities. The disinformation agent is an individual or entity involved in the deliberate creation and dissemination of false or misleading information to deceive, manipulate, or cause harm. This activity is often part of a coordinated campaign designed to influence public opinion, obscure the truth, or achieve political, military, or commercial goals. So the disinformation agent, I feel like, is also pretty important if you think about it, because it's to deliberately create false and misleading information to deceive, to manipulate, to cause harm. That's probably happening to us all the time, if you think about it. Counterintelligence or counterespionage is any activity aimed at protecting an agency's intelligence program from an opposition's intelligence service. It includes gathering information and conducting activities to prevent espionage, sabotage, assassinations, or other intelligence activities conducted by, for, or on the behalf of foreign powers, organizations, or persons. That's really interesting And as we get farther into modern time, we'll talk about the Great Game. But basically, so counterintelligence, it's not really looking for spying on other countries and to gather information on them. It's spying to protect. It's looking for ways that their side could be trying to sabotage or espionage or, assassinate. So it's just it's the same thing, but with a different mindset and aim. Okay, double agent, a person pretending to work as a spy for one government while actually working as a spy for another government. Psychological warfare, the use of propaganda and other psychological operations to influence the opinions, emotions, attitudes, and behavior of opposition groups, with the aim of demoralizing the enemy, breaking their will to fight or resist, and sometimes rendering them favorably disposed to the originator's position. Okay, so this is really important too. So psyops is a form of psychological warfare, and that, like it's saying, they use propaganda, they use psychological operations. That's what a psyop is, to influence the opinions, the emotions, the attitudes, and the behavior of certain groups that they're targeting. And I maintain that this is very much going on. And when we get to subversion, which is the next one, we're actually going to go over the definition and then actually read more about it because I think it's very important. But it's also breaking their will to fight, demoralizing, and then it also will try to get them to be favorable of their position or the position they want them to have, right? Okay, so subversion. Subversion, which is Latin for overthrow, refers to a process by which the values and principles of a system in place are contradicted or reversed in an attempt to sabotage the established social order and its structure of power, authority, tradition, hierarchy, and social norms. Subversion can be described as an attack on the public morale and the will to resist. Subversion can be described as an attack on the public morale and the will to resist intervention are the products of combined political and social or class loyalties which are usually attached to national symbols. So like I said, this is very important. The psychological warfare and the subversion part are very important for us. This other stuff where politicians are spying on other politicians and trying to gain favor and all that, yeah, that's going on and it's good to know about. But these two here are like what I feel like directly affects us as a population. Hey guys, so it's that time where I need to ask you to subscribe to the channel. And if you're already subscribed, just hit the like, please. If you don't do this, I will be abducted by aliens. Thanks. So I have an article on that. Subversion. So subversion is used as a tool to achieve political goals because it generally carries less risk, cost, and difficulty as opposed to open belligerency. So what it's saying there is rather than going into a war and just fighting a crazy belligerent all-out war, subversion is a tool that can be used to achieve things that the government wants. That's easier than going in right away. Furthermore, it's relatively cheap form of warfare that does not require large amounts of training. A subversive is something or someone carrying out the potential for some degree of subversion. In this context, a subversive is sometimes called a traitor with respect to and usually by the government in power. Subversion is often a goal of comedians, artists, and people in those careers. In this case, being subversive can mean questioning, poking fun at, and undermining the established order in general. The problem with defining the term subversion is that there is not a single definition that is universally accepted. Charles Townsend describes subversion as a term so elastic to be virtually devoid of meaning, and its use does little more than convey the enlarged sense of the vulnerability of modern systems to all kinds of covert assaults. What follows are some of the many attempts to define the term. So here's some different terms so we can try to have some kind of understanding. Subversion is the undermining or detachment of the loyalties or significant political and social groups within the victimized state, and their transference under ideal conditions to the symbols and institutions of the aggressor. So you're going in and you're doing things that causes the victims of the state that you're targeting to detach from the loyalties of their country, to the social groups of their country. Why? So that you can weaken them, right? Subversion. Actions designed to undermine the military, economic, psychological, or political strength or morale of a governing authority. So this is a definition that's targeted at a particular government that's being targeted. Subversion activity. Anyone lending aid, comfort, and moral support to individuals, groups, and organizations that advocate the overthrow of incumbent governments by force and violence is subversive and engaged in subversive activity. Gee, I wonder, can anybody think what that might be, going on in our country right now? Really use your brains with this, okay? All willful acts that are intended to be detrimental to the best interests of government and that do not fall into the categories of treason, sedition, sabotage, or espionage will be placed in the category of subversive activity. Subversive political action, a planned series of activities designed to accomplish political objectives by influencing, dominating, or displacing individuals or groups who are so placed to affect the decisions and actions of another government. Okay, so that's interesting. A destructive, aggressive activity aimed to destroy the country, nation, or geographical area of your enemy by demoralizing the cultural values and changing the population's perception of reality. Sound familiar? Sure does to me. This guy defines subversion as a term that could be lumped together under the modern name warfare as being interlocking systems of actions, political, economic, psychological, and military that aims to overthrow the established authority in a country. Okay, so conceptual understanding. Defining and understanding subversion means identifying entities, structures, and things that can be subverted. Furthermore, it may help to identify practices and tools that are not subversive. Institutions and morals can be subverted, but ideology, on the other hand, cannot. The fall of a government or the creation of a new government as a result of an external warfare is not subversion. Espionage does not count as subversion because it's not an action that leads directly to an overthrow of a government. Information gathered in espionage may be used to plan and carry out subversive activities. Right? I was just thinking, I was like, yeah, but it's like the first step, right? To gain an understanding of what is considered to be subversive requires understanding the intent of those taking action. This makes defining and identifying subversion a difficult process. I think if you know what it is, it's not that hard to figure out. Okay, so tools and practices. Establishing front groups. That's a really important word. Establishing front groups. And penetrating and manipulating existing political parties. Infiltrating the armed forces, the police, and other institutions of the state, as well as important non-government organization, NGOs. Remember the last video? Remember what I said about NGOs? Non-government organizations. Generating civil unrest through demonstrations, strikes, and boycotts. Other factors, while not specifically falling into these categories, may also be useful to subversive dissidents. Additionally, many tools may overlap into other groups of tools as well. As an example, subversives may infiltrate an organization for cultural subversion more so than for control. Civil unrest may be used to provoke the government into a violent response. Sounds pretty familiar to me. So here's more information. I don't think we need to, let me see. Okay, so maybe this is important. In order for a group to be successful in subverting a government, the group itself and its ideas must be seen as an acceptable alternative to the status quo. However, groups that work towards subverting a government in many cases follow ideas that promote goals that on their surface would not receive the support of the population. Exactly. And the population doesn't even know this is going on. 1 and 2, this happens for years. So by the time you realize what's going on, you're already screwed, which is what's going on now. Decades. These operations go on for decades. Therefore, to gain public credibility, attract new supporters, generate revenue, and acquire other resources, groups need to undertake political activities that are entirely separate or appear separate from the overtly violent activities of those groups. That's interesting. Sometimes this is achieved by infiltrating political parties, labor unions. So that happened with the mob and the labor unions, right? They infiltrated the labor unions. So it doesn't have to only be governments, that's doing this. Community groups and charitable organizations. And the charitable organizations ones too, they do that to fund. They steal like a lot of this money that goes to foundations and stuff like that. Infiltrating organizations is an important tool because these institutions are already seen as legitimate in the eyes of the people and provide a platform to express their ideas. When infiltrating, the dissident identifies needs of an organization, then links those needs to solutions that his ideology can provide. This was a technique that the Communist Party USA employed. Once the organization has been co-opted, the dissident can then move on to establishing ties with other groups. Furthermore, in addition to gaining possible legitimacy for its ideas, the infiltration of these groups can bolster political allies, attack government policies, and attract international support. If some organizations are too difficult to infiltrate, it may be necessary to create new organizations that appear to be independent but are actually under the direction of the subversive group. The infiltration of state organizations can provide subversive groups the opportunity to do many things to achieve their goals. The infiltration of security forces can provide information about the government's capabilities and how they plan to address the group's activities. Infiltration also provides the opportunity to plant false information, lead the government to misallocate resources, to steal funds, weapons, equipment, and other resources, and ultimately aid in weakening and delegitimizing the government. The targets of infiltration are not limited to the groups and institutions mentioned above. Economic industries and universities have also been a target for infiltration. Heck yes, they have, and we're going to go into that eventually. In the case of universities, the liberal arts departments are more prone to subversion than the hard sciences. Interesting. So they cause agitation and civil unrest, right? Terror. They make people not want to speak. Destruction of property, kidnapping. Like, what was that group that did that back in the 60s? What was that group? I'll have to think of it. Bribery, subverting cultural hegemony. Very important. Subverting laws. So letting criminals out on the streets over and over again to cause sabotage and issues and make people angry and cause agitation, right? Okay, so I thought that that was extremely important. Okay, so now that we went over the terms, we can start learning about how it worked in the ancient world. So some of the earliest references to spies and intelligence comes from the region of Syria and Iraq in the 18th century BC. So quite a ways back. And these are just the early, I mean, clearly people have been doing this since the dawn of time, you know. Okay, Everything Old is New Again in Ancient Iraq and Syria by Rosemary Sheldon, and this is in 2016. It's an article based off of an even bigger like document or whatever. As soon as man learned to create documents, he began to classify them. This is one of many indications that intelligence gathering is as old as civilization itself. And you know what? As I was researching this video, I was surprised how hard it was to find decent information about spying in the ancient world. And I find that really odd. And I did see something as I was looking that said, and maybe it's in this article, I don't know, but there was something I read that was saying that spycraft intelligence in the ancient world is something that historians and archaeologists and people who try to put together the past has sort of been leaving out, and that there needs to be a discipline that adds it in so that they can have like another piece of the puzzle for building their stories, and that it's a very important part. And I thought that was interesting because, you know, the Bronze Age collapse and everything that happened, I kind of am starting to wonder if also spycraft played a role in that after I researched and did all this research on for this video. And so anyway, it's actually the videos that I found, there were no historians really talking about it. Like, you know, normally you can find like a lecture or something. It's just weird. Okay, so techniques regarded as completely modern, such as classifying documents, have actually existed for thousands of years. In fact, the world's oldest classified document is part of the story. Unfortunately, much of the evidence for these operations comes from Iraq and Syria, where, because of recent political events and wars, archaeological work is nearly impossible. Even locating objects already in museums has become much more difficult than before. IL seems to spend as much time destroying artifacts as it does people. The best we can do is look at what remains and analyze what we have learned from the material that has already been dug up. Two ancient cities in particular, Mari and Shabat Anil, have provided us with a whole host of spy stories that illuminate how important intelligence was to ancient rulers, as well as the techniques they used to collect, analyze, and disseminate the information they needed. So, evidence from Mari. The city-state of Mari is in Syria on the east bank of the Euphrates River, about 10 miles north of the Iraqi frontier. The documents are letters in cuneiform that were sent or received by the kings of Mari. The first thing we discover by reading these letters is that Mari's relationship with its neighbors was complex, and much of its activity was conducted clandestinely. The rivalry between the dynasties of Mari provides an abundant examples of remarkably modern stratagems and intelligence activities. Not surprisingly, our story begins with a conspiracy. In about 1813 BC, a man named Shamshi-Adad successfully schemed to overthrow the dynasty of Zamari-Lim and take control of the region around Mari. Once he succeeded, Shamshi-Adad put his son Yashma-Hadad on the throne of Mari while he ruled from a place called Shabat-Anil. His other son, Ishma-Dagan, was made ruler of the city Eklaatum. Accordingly, he sent a stream of letters to his son with the advice on military matters. These letters are now available in a series of books from Peter's publishers. In these, we see Shamshi-Adad's instruction on how to surprise enemies, how to stage an ambush, and how to set up deceptive operations. All activities that relied on gaining intelligence quickly and acting on it. Without such intelligence, there would be no effective coordinated efforts between the three kings. One of his letters pretty much summed up the state of the military affairs in this theater of operation and did it in remarkably modern terms. If you are constantly trying tricks, stratagems, and maneuvering endlessly to destroy the enemy likewise constantly tries tricks and endlessly maneuvers against you. Just as wrestlers try to trick one another all the time, I hope the enemy will not maneuver you into an ambush. Shamshi-Adad never missed an opportunity to lure an unsuspecting foe into a trap. Of course, he wanted to teach his sons the same skills. They seem to have learned their lessons. We have examples of the sons using deception operations, such as attacking a territory with a group of guerrillas formed by their own men disguised as the opposing force. Spying and propaganda. The bulk of the military intelligence that Shamshi-Adad's forces needed was obtained through espionage. Diplomats and messengers on both sides were automatically assumed to be spying. There was even a tribe, the people of Zalmaquam, for whom spying was a specialty. Their informers were called Sa-Lysium, or those willing to give information to the enemy. Supposedly they could not be trusted unless they were paid large sums of money, although why this would make them more trustworthy is unclear, and the sources say there's no guarantees that they would be effective or loyal. Shamshi-Adad's was also famous for dispatching propagandists who were known as men of rumors. When he decided to conquer Zalaquim itself, he did so by using fifth columnists. He recruited certain men to propagandize for him in advance or by spreading rumors of an advancing Assyrian army that scared the enemy into abandoning its positions. In one case, we know that propaganda operations conducted by only 2 soldiers were able to spread fear and caused troops to revolt. Man, that's like powerful. I mean, like really think about that. These propaganda operations conducted by only 2 soldiers were able to spread enough fear that and cause troops to revolt. Internal security. Military affairs were not the only important subject for the intelligence collection. Political assassinations and palace intrigues were commonplace. Thus, internal security received a great deal of intelligence attention as well. As in most ancient societies, intelligence often came from the gods, and consulting oracles was a way to determine what the gods knew. They believed that the deities at times offered advice to kings about their own safety. Such warnings could be quite specific. A goddess speaking through a female priestess reportedly told a king. Okay, so that's important right here. They believed that deities at times offered advice to kings about their own safety. Such warnings could be quite specific. A goddess speaking through a female priestess reportedly told the king, "They will test you in rebellion, protect yourself, your servants, your commissioners whom you love, place them at your side, cause them to stand by you so they guard you. Do not even walk alone, as those who will test you, I will deliver them into your hands." So when we get into further reading, this will be important. Kings did not just depend on the gods for their security. However, the gods might be guarding the king, but the bodyguard had his utility as well. Kings also needed spies to test the people's loyalty. When ringleaders of a disturbance were caught, their fate was not an inviolable one. One text speaks of a conspirator being beheaded. Another conspirator had his skull crushed. Being proactive and having your enemies assassinated was definitely an option, but one had to be careful to keep such orders secret so that the target did not find out ahead of time. One king gave instructions for the elimination of an undesirable person. Locate this man. If there is a ditch in this countryside or in the city, make this man disappear into it. Whether he climbs to the heavens or sinks to hell, let no one see him anymore. The document was marked secret so that the execution order would not be leaked to anyone lest the target hear about it and flee. Nor was the punishment light. It extended to include the plotter's entire household and his companions in crime. Both they and their possessions were often set on fire. Despite the efforts of his security agents, in approximately 1782 BC, Shamshi-Adad was overthrown by the dynasty that he had displaced. Zerialam took back the throne, and Mari, with the help of his father-in-law, Urim-Liam, ruler of the Syria kingdom of Yamhad, which is modern-day Aleppo. Not surprisingly, one of the documents from Mari says that he planned to take back the city by introducing spies into Shabat-Anil. We are still in the dark about the intelligence failure that allowed Shamshi-Adad to be overthrown. More records of rivalry between the Lim dynasty and the family of Shamshi-Adad were found a few decades ago in a place called Shabat-Anil. Although Shabat-Anil is mentioned in the Bible, its remains were only discovered in 1978. They uncovered a royal temple which contained tablets that identified the site as Shabat-Anil. Another 1,000 tablets were found in September and October of 1987, making this the largest single collection of written material found in northern Mesopotamia in more than a half century. According to the tablet, Shabat-Anil was Shamshi-Adad's capital. Not surprisingly, among the first documents unearthed were reports of spy exchanges. The reports detail how Shamshi-Adad deployed spies called scouts or eyes to check up on both friends and enemies. Sometimes spies on either side were captured. One of the documents in its treaty for a spy exchange, important agents were often ransomed. Shamshi-Adad ordered the establishment of a special bureau in the palace at Shabat-Anil to process the various types of clandestine information collected. The members of this bureau translated and analyzed captured documents, kept copies of secret dispatches, and generally kept the king up to date on intelligence matters. Documents captured from the enemy did not always produce useful intelligence. One report says that 4 documents were captured from the enemy, but they contained nothing of interest. Still, the agent forwarded them anyway. We know the name of at least one head of this bureau. He was called Bakwam or Little Gnat, an appropriate nickname for someone who buzzes around the palace collecting information. The proverbial fly on the wall. He collected and evaluated intelligence from various governors, vassal states, gossipy merchants, wandering artisans, sailors, messengers, refugees, and even from the queen herself. Conclusion. Shamshi-Adad's death was a major blow to Shabat-Anil, and in the tumultuous 2 decades that followed, neighboring princes and kings on the Haber plains ransacked and pillaged Shabat-Anil and fought with each other over its spoils. It is also ironic to think that today the United States is desperately trying to collect intelligence about people on the ground in that area, just as local rulers were doing 4,000 years ago. The city-states of Mesopotamia endured for 1,000 years after Shamshi-Adad's death until they were overwhelmed by the Achaemenid kings of Persia around 500 BC. Because many of the cities were put to the torch, the sun-baked clay tablets were fired to a hardness that allowed them to survive for the next 2,000 years, and thus allowed them to be found by modern archaeologists. Now in the 21st century, Mesopotamians are still fighting Persians, and of course, ISIL occupies the plains of northern Syria. No one knows how much of the ancient evidence has been damaged or destroyed. As for our secret document, I have spent years trying to locate a photo of the original tablet. The French scholars in charge of the publications of documents in Paris could not produce a copy. The volume that was supposed to contain the transcription was missing at the Library of Congress, although I'm told one can access it at the Bishop Payne Library of the Virginia Theological Seminary in Alexandria, Virginia. The more elegant solution would be able to see the original tablet at the National Museum at Aleppo in Syria, even if one wanted to dodge bombs and sniper bullets to get it. It would seem that after 4,000 years, the document remains classified. So that's interesting, huh? Okay, so next up would be ancient Egypt, and it has a history of intelligence going back to the 15th century BC, with the Armana letters being documents that were found, which discuss diplomacy, uncovering disloyalty, covert operations, and details of rival kingdoms. And I do have some information on that. So ancient Egypt developed one of the earliest and most sophisticated intelligence and espionage systems in human history, with evidence of its practices dating back to at least 1500 BC. The pharaohs employed a wide range of spies for both domestic and international purposes, using them to ferret out disloyal subjects, monitor internal dissent, and gather information on potential enemies. This network was crucial for maintaining the pharaoh's power and ensuring the stability of the state, as threats from within were considered as dangerous as external ones, which is very important. And I don't think it's something we think about, but threats from within are a real thing that people have been having to deal with since the beginning of time. And I feel like maybe we should realize that, or have more knowledge in our mind about that. The intelligence apparatus in ancient Egypt was highly developed, involving the use of written communication that necessitated the creation of codes, disguised writing, trick inks, and hidden compartments in clothing to protect messages. Egyptian spies were pioneers in the use of poisons derived from plants, snakes, and employing them for assassinations or acts of sabotage against enemies. The system also included a network of informants and agents who operated within Egypt and abroad, gathering intelligence on neighboring kingdoms such as the Hittites, Canaan, the Amurru, as well as the political and military strength of its rivals like Greece and Rome. Evidence of this extensive intelligence activity is found in historic records, including the Amarna letters from the 14th century BC, which are diplomatic correspondence that discuss intelligence and espionage. The use of spies was not limited to the state. Other political and religious figures also employed agents to protect themselves from the pharaoh's spies, to further their own intrigues. The system was so effective that it contributed to Egypt's ability to defend its conquests, maintain control over its empire, which extended from Libya to Babylonia and from Ethiopia to Cyprus and the Aegean Islands. The concept of a universal empire, which required rapid information from distant provinces, was a key driver for the development of this early intelligence service. And so when I was looking into this, a lot of their stuff, they looked at other tribes to see how strong they were, to see if they could overtake them, and they used the slave trade. And so you'll notice there's a lot of, I don't know if you're like starting to pick up on this, but there's a lot of criminality that goes into intelligence, which is important. Then you have the record of the Hittite king Matawali II sending spies posing as deserters to lead Ramses II into an ambush at the Battle of Kadesh, and the story of Moses in the Bible, who sent 12 spies into Canaan to prepare for the Israelites' conquer of that region. So remember, Joshua and Caleb were the two famous spies that got caught up with like somebody noticed them and they were on the run, and they ended up with the prostitute Rahab, and they made that deal with her that they would get her out, and then she was actually put into the lineage of Jesus Christ. It's a really good story and has like a lot of, if you're a Christian or you believe in Christianity, or even if you don't, like, why not know about it? I don't know. But it's an important story to Christians because it shows that the way it's viewed is that, and there's a lot of hidden messages in that story too. But she had to put the red cord out of her window, and her whole family were saved because she trusted in God. So it shows that anybody could, it was another story of how anybody could be saved if they believed in God and them and their whole household. It's sort of like a theme throughout the Bible, but the woman was actually put into the lineage of Jesus Christ because she was let me think, she was Boaz's mom, and Boaz married Ruth, another non-Israelite, so a foreigner, who was also put into the lineage. And all this means stuff. I know we're not talking about Christianity today, but anyway, whatever. And like, this was just a short thing about these two, just to connect dots, you know, because the Hittite was a powerful kingdom. They were up to stuff. The Hebrews were a powerful tribe. So up next, I believe we have Persia. Yep. So ancient Persia. Ancient Persia developed one of the most sophisticated intelligence and espionage systems in the ancient world, primarily under the Achaemenid and later Scythian dynasties. So this Achaemenid I believe he's mentioned in the Bible, but it was like a dynasty. The foundation of this system was a royal road network, which connected to the empire's vast territories from Persepolis to Susa. So Susa was the capital, and extended to Sardis and Ephesus on the coast of Asia Minor. This network was supported by fixed remount stations where royal messengers known as angari could rest and exchange horses, enabling the rapid transmission of orders and intelligence. So a lot of these ancient civilizations used like postal service and scouting services and these messaging systems that were set up. They incorporated them into their intelligence network. The speed and efficiency of this postal system were legendary, with Herodotus describing the messengers as being stayed neither by snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness from completing their rounds, a feat he claimed was unmatched by any mortal. Sounds a lot like our postal service. The intelligence function was not limited to message delivery. The Persian kings employed a system of eyes and ears to monitor their empire. The eyes were high-ranking officials who conducted investigations at the king's behest, while the ears were lower-ranking agents who acted as spies, gathering information from the populace. This system, which may have been derived from earlier Babylonian and Assyrian practices, so like probably that Mari and all that we were talking about earlier, that would have been before this. So they just build on each other, served to check the power of provincial governors and to ensure the central authority remained informed of potential threats. The use of fire signals along a network of specifically built towers further enhanced the speed of communication, providing an early warning system for border incursions and approaching enemies. So they were using smoke to send messages. The Sassanian Empire, which succeeded the Achaemenids, continued and expanded these practices. Sassanian military authorities employed a wide range of reconnaissance and espionage methods tailored to the specific challenges of warfare, geography, and the political landscape of their time. While both were strategic and tactical intelligence were conducted, tactical intelligence played the dominant role, reflecting the military art of the late antiquity period. The Persian system was so effective that it was regarded as a great achievement, and the greatest realized in this respect in ancient history by Greek observers like Xenophon and Herodotus. The sophisticated network of communication and surveillance was a key factor in the longevity and stability of the Persian Empire, allowing the kings to maintain control over a vast and diverse territory. So that's another thing. Without intelligence, the central ruling government wasn't stable, and it wasn't stable for the people either. So even though it's super sketch and there was like criminality and it probably caused problems, without this knowledge, somebody could just attack you, somebody could assassinate you, poison you, and then that causes upheaval, and then the whole populace is at danger. So, and a lot of it also is like military. So military in all these stories is always connected to intelligence. So this is where things get interesting, at least for me, because this is one of my favorite topics is ancient Greece. So here I have a map of Greece, and Greece wasn't a country, right? It's just this whole region. And all of these are city-states. And so I'm not for sure if you guys know what a city-state is, but I'm going to explain it to you. See all of these, like there's Troy up in the, like if we're starting up at the top, up around the Persian Empire, there's Troy going down. See all these, there's Ephesus, and then across from Ephesus, there's Athens, which was one of the most powerful city-states. I mean, it's at different points in time, there were like thousands of city-states. Sparta is one of them. Thrace is way up here at the very top. Let's explain what a city-state is. A Greek city-state known in ancient Greek as polis was the fundamental political and social unit of ancient Greece, functioning as an independent nation-state centered on a city and its surrounding territory. The term city-state reflects both the relatively small size of these entities and the concentration of political and cultural power in a central urban center. Ancient Greece was not a unified country, but a collection of these independent city-states, each with its own government, laws, and identity. While people shared a common language, religion, and culture, they primarily identified as citizens of their specific polis, such as an Athenian, Spartan, or Corinthian. rather than as Greeks in a collective sense. And yeah, so a lot of them had democracy. Some of them had kings. It's really interesting and fascinating. And so they'd have like a city like Athens, and then they would have like a cultural sort of like urban area around it. Then they would have countryside outside of that, right? And so it was sort of like just one city, cultural area around the city, urban, and then countryside. Each polis typically consisted of an urban center, often fortified with walls, and featuring a central acropolis housing temples and government buildings, along with the surrounding agricultural countryside. The number of city-states was vast, with estimates ranging from over 1,000 to as many as 2,000, reflecting the fragmented nature of the region. While some city-states were small and self-contained, others like Athens and Sparta governed larger territories and controlled smaller cities within their regions. So, and I know this map, it makes it look like everything is really close together. There's vast distances between all these, right? And then the terrain and the landscape is another thing that could keep people isolated, surrounded by mountains, and they're cut off from over on this side. So I know on this map, it makes it look like they're all just really close, but they really weren't that close. The political systems varied widely. Athens developed one of the earliest forms of democracy where male citizens could vote directly on laws. Sparta was ruled by 2 kings and a council of elders, emphasizing military strength. Corinth was a monarchy known for its wealth and trade, as well as its architectural innovations like the Corinthian order, and Delphi served as a major religious and cultural center, home to the famous Delphic oracle. Okay, and so another thing that I want to say is this was a global, this was globalized. Because this was during the Bronze Age, all these people used copper, and to get copper, or to make copper, you have to have 10, or they use bronze. So to make bronze, you have to have copper and 10. Sorry, I'm like spacing. And they didn't have 10 in some of these places. Not enough to, you know what I'm saying, for their needs. It was like oil. Tin was like oil to these people, to us. There had to be a constant flow. And they actually got it way, I think, see the Persian Empire, way past the Persian Empire. I'm spacing on the name of the area, but it went over vast thousands and thousands of miles to come here. So these people had global trade. Okay. There's always been this, you know, throughout history, just like we have now. We have to get oil from here and we have to get this from there. And these other countries need this. And it's a global network of trade. It's always existed. Espionage in ancient Greece was a significant, though often ad hoc practice, primarily focused on immediate military advantage rather than long-term strategic intelligence gathering. The Greeks understood the importance of information in warfare, with military writers like Ennius Tacitus emphasizing the need for knowledge of geography for effective defense in the 4th century BC. Spying was conducted through various informal methods, including reconnaissance missions, the use of scouts, and the exploitation of social customs like xenia or hospitality, where foreign guests could be used to spread misinformation. The most interesting thing about Greece, though, is something many don't know about, obviously, which I didn't realize until I was doing research for this video. I thought everybody knew this. And I had first heard about it years ago on the Rising Tides Foundation channel. The people over there, they like do nothing but read and study and learn ancient texts and literature and go over Aristotle and stuff like that. Really good people. The video I was watching wasn't even about the oracles, but they just mentioned it in passing in the video. They know stuff, you know what I mean? So I just thought everybody knew that now, but I could barely find anything on it, even though I even heard about it somewhere else, but I couldn't remember where after that. So anyway, the vast network of oracles in the ancient kingdom, what were they really? Okay, so I'm just gonna read this basic thing about the oracles at first, and this is sort of the official story, or like one of them anyway. The ancient world featured a vast network of oracles, serving as crucial centers for the divine communication and guidance across diverse cultures. The most renowned of these was the Oracle of Delphi, where Pythia, a priestess of Apollo, delivered prophetic utterances after entering a trance-like state, while likely influenced by vapors from a fixture beneath the temple. And the other thing, I don't know if people, you might not know this, but Pythia was just the woman, what they called the woman that was doing it at the time. So, because this went on for like, I don't know, 1,000 or more years. Clearly it wasn't the same woman every time. So Pythia was just the name of the woman And she wasn't even in control of anything. She was forced to do all that, like, and she was drugged. Delphi was considered the navel of the world, and it exerted significant influence on political, military, and personal decisions throughout the Hellenic world. Now, even though this is the official story, or just the one that people know for some reason, this should tell you something. It exerted significant influence on political, military, and personal decisions throughout the Hellenic world. What have we been learning about? Another oracle was at Dodona in Epirus, dedicated to Zeus, where the god's will was interpreted from the rustling of sacred oak leaves and the sound of a Bronze Age gong. Okay. The oracle of Zeus at Olympia was also prominent, with priests divining omens from the entrails of sacrificial animals. Beyond Greece, oracles were widespread. So that I guess people don't know about this either, but it wasn't like there was just one oracle. They were widespread throughout the entire ancient world, and they were all connected to each other. In Anatolia, notable sites included Didyma and Claros, both dedicated to Apollo, while the oracle of Zeus, Ammon, at Sui Oasis in Libya was so famous that Alexander the Great visited it after conquering Egypt. The Cumaean Sibyl at Cumae in Italy became renowned for her Sibylline books, which were consulted by Rome during emergencies. Oracles also existed for specific purposes, such as the oracle at Trophaeus at Lebadia, where supplicants underwent ritual purification and slept in a cave to receive prophetic dreams, and the necromantion of Acheron, one of the most important oracles of the dead. Incubation rituals, where individuals slept in sacred places to receive divine messages through dreams, were common at sites like Ephrata and Amorphis. These oracles, ranging from grand temples to modern tombs, formed a complex network of religious institutions that shaped decisions from the personal to the political across the ancient Mediterranean and Near East. Okay, so with that in mind, let's watch this video. So like I said, I couldn't find a lot of information. So I did find 2 videos. One was really long, and I only am going to play it at the time that we need. And then this one. And both are from just random guys, but it's pretty interesting. So let's see.
Hello, my friends. I just wanted to make a quick video today talking about an idea that I came across in a book called The Craft of Intelligence by Alan Dulles, who was the longest-serving director of the CIA. And what he said in Chapter 2 of The Craft of Intelligence, in giving a brief history of espionage, he says that the ancient Greek oracles were intelligence-gathering services. And prior to this, I had always believed that the ancient Greeks were just sort of out of their minds superstitious, and that they believed that these young girls who were inhaling fumes or something were, speaking gibberish or speaking in poems, that they were so superstitious that they actually believed that this kind of thing was happening, where the young girls were like channeling the word of the gods and stuff like that. And I never believed that there was actually a strategic value to the oracles. And once I read this, it kind of really got me thinking, and I started to look for evidence for or against this notion. And the first interesting bit of evidence that I found is that the ancient oracle at Delphi, which is the most famous one, the one everyone thinks about, was not the only oracle. It was actually part of a vast network of oracles that is international in scope, and it has its roots in Egypt. And the first oracle cults were actually snake goddess cults from Egypt. And according to Herodotus, the oracles in Greece were brought there by Phoenicians who brought 2 Egyptian priestesses to start the oracles in Greece. So these oracles were basically part of a large international religious network. And when you look at stories like the story of King Croesus, the amount of wealth that these kings from all over the Mediterranean were willing to spend on prophecies from the oracle was exorbitant. There's ridiculous amounts of gold, silver, animals, expensive purple clothing, things like that are all mentioned. And they just shower the oracles with wealth. So the oracles definitely had enough wealth to sustain some kind of a network of informants. And also there's one interesting piece of evidence that I found on a website that I'll link in the description, which is an omphalos, one of these earth navel statues that would be found in these temples. It contained an image which showed two women sending doves to each other. And what the author of this article on this website stated was that this is potentially evidence that they used homing pigeons or homing doves to send information at vast distances, which would give whole new meaning to the phrase "language of the birds." And you know, this is the kind of thing, this technology really, having birds send messages as a revolutionary kind of technology. This is something that they would want to keep very secret. So if you gain information from far away, that how do you explain how you got this information if you don't want to give the secret away? Well, you have to say that the gods gave it to you, or some kind of spirit brought it to you. It's the occult, the mysticism around it serves to protect the trade secrets of espionage, in this instance at least. So the fact that it was an international network, the fact that they were extremely wealthy, the fact that there's some evidence that they might have used homing birds to send messages, this all sort of leads me to think that there's possibly some truth to this notion that the ancient oracles actually served the role of an intelligence gathering network, and that mysticism, occultism, was used to misdirect and confuse people about the actual means by which they gathered their information and the means by which they operated. And I want to speak more in the future about this strange connection between the occult and espionage. That'll be in another video. Thank you for watching.
Okay, so I also want to explain maybe a little bit more about how these oracles worked. So they would be temples to like a certain god, right? And they would have women, or like one woman at a time in this temple, and she would be on drugs. They would drug her up. Either there was a fixture in a rock, or they were giving her something. We're not really for sure. But she was kept out of her mind. Then people from all over the world, including kings, so merchants, people who sold things, regular people just wanting to know their life, about their love life, or should I do this or that, or whatever. Very wealthy people, elite people, would all come to these temples, and they only held them once a month. I don't think they all did the exact same thing, but they would only be open at certain times. And people would come and they would pay a lot of money, especially kings. And what they would do is they would make the whole thing like crazy, right? Like they'd bring the person in and they've got the girl and she's all dressed scandally and she's, got oil all over her body and she's like writhing and stuff. And they would make a whole like scene out of it. So it felt like really crazy and in a religious experience, right? And then once they did the ritual, and oftentimes it involved also an animal sacrifice and stuff like that, then the men who ran these places would have to interpret the crazy utterings, this weird sound. The woman wasn't actually saying words. She would utter like just weird stuff, and then the priest would have to take that and interpret it, which could take a while. So then the asker who was also paying and stuff would have to wait for the answer. And you can only imagine that, say you're these dudes that are clearly running everything and have all the money and you know all kinds of stuff. And so like a king comes and tells you, hey, if I go conquer these people over here, like, or if I go to war with these people over here, what's going to happen to me, blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe they like those people over there because maybe they, are doing something that benefits them in some way. Maybe they come to the temple a lot and ask questions. Maybe there's, as if these people don't have other stuff going on, maybe, if this king goes over here and takes these people out, it'll affect them, right? So they will give a message that will affect the decision that king makes. You know what I mean? Or that important person. Maybe that important person's like, oh, should I take this grain over here and sell it at this price, or is it too risky? Well, maybe they want those people over there to not have grain for some reason. So then they give a message, oh no, take your grain to blah, 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 because the weather is fair that direction or something. You know what I mean? So you have to imagine the vast amount of control that these people had. And it also is super older, like it came there from even older religions. So then that makes you wonder, was all this religion and these superstitions and this stuff, was all this like developed as a way to manipulate and propagandize the public so that you could get intelligence from them without them knowing? It's very wild to think about. It's taken me a while to even like wrap my head around this, because we're talking about something so vast and crazy that they could pull this off. That, we're talking super powerful. This is wild when you really sit down and you start to think about it. So I have another video too. I'm not starting this at the beginning and it's probably going to be in like a weird spot or whatever, but I think in this video, he even talks about like the Egypt connection and stuff like that. I will link this video if you guys want to watch the whole thing, but here we go.
Dates. And he says, you see my fellow senators, these dates here, they're juicy. They're absolutely fresh. They're delicious. And the senators all got quiet. And I think it's Cato, I can't remember, but he looked around and he says, these dates came off a ship from our enemies in Carthage. And they were in just 2 days ago in Africa, they were taken off the vine. So he was taken off the tree, excuse me. So this opened up their eyes that, damn, these are our mortal enemies. The Carthaginians are our mortal enemies. And this is what started the wars with Hannibal and all that. But it all started from a senator getting up and showing the other senators, man, these fresh dates that had just been picked and put on a ship and brought here. It took less than 2 days. So, and that distance is much greater than the distance that I'm telling you here between these oracles. And the reason I'm telling you this is because what was happening at the oracles. The oracles had set up a system where they themselves did not have to produce any answers to people who asked questions of them and brought money and sacrifices and all, or whatever, in real time. Everybody was delayed. Everybody. And it was all because of religious reasons or sacraments or whatever. And if they needed to buy time, let me give you an example. If an Athenian statesman came and said, "Hey, I have business. I have business at Miletus. Miletus is on the other side of the Aegean. It's over there by the other oracle, Didymus. And he said, I have business over there. I want to give you this talent of silver and 3 goats. And I need to know, can I continue my business with this producer over here? And can I keep buying his shiploads of material, or do I need to find somebody else? Because, the guy might have some suspicions that things aren't right. So he goes to the oracle and he asks, "Hey, I need to know if this guy is kosher. Can I continue to do business with him, or am I going to get screwed on this? Because this is a lot of money I'm sending overseas to get burned." So the oracle would never produce an answer instantly, and no one ever expected it to. No one. This is why all the oracles had basically hotels and motels set up. They had whole out pavilions and amphitheaters, and they had all kinds of areas where people could camp out because it was expected. There was only 9 times a year that they were going to produce answers. So you didn't get answers to your questions when you wanted them. You got them when they gave them to you. And that's the key here with the oracles, because it would take 2 days for them to dispatch a courier that's already going there. Because you got to understand, the system's already in place, guys. The oracular system is already in place. They know how many couriers are going up to Delphi from Dodona. And from Dodona, how many are going to the satellites. And they already know what ships will be pulling out of what ports and what times. Everything is run by tight schedule. The Greeks were awesome administrators. That's where the Romans got it. So this whole network of information that's moving around is fantastic. And this is what's happening. They send information, a courier pack with a whole bunch of questions that are designed for that part of the world, for that oracle over there, because that oracle over there is like an intelligence agency, and it knows all the ongoings of everything going on in the Ionian states over there. Just like Delphi knew all of central Aegean, the islands, Greece. That's why Dodona knew everything that was going up way up in Thracia, in Macedonia, in northern Greece, and in Italia, in ancient Italy, in Etruria, the Etruscans. These oracles were getting information from couriers every single day. And there were priests with acolytes, curates, whatever you want to call them, that were in there cataloging all this data in geographical areas, what's going on. These places were the central hubs of knowledge, and yet the people didn't know it. Everything was secret. Everything was paid. People who were involved in the oracles in the temple, they were involved.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Do you see what I'm saying? These people knew everything, and there was this vast intelligence operation, which really makes sense when you start thinking about it and wrapping your head around it. And the people had no idea. Thousands of years this is going on, and the people have no idea, and they're paying these people vast amounts of wealth, and these people are the decision makers from our definition. The decision makers gather the intelligence, and the people have no idea. Does that not blow your mind? Imagine what they're doing to us today, that we have no idea. Forces that we don't even see the shadow of could, just imagine how we could be being manipulated in ways that we don't even understand by vast powers that are beyond our ability to grasp. It's just wild.
In a network, basically, not just espionage, but they were involved in a network of absolute secrecy. They can only communicate through symbols. And the outside, people on the outside looking in interpreted this as the mysteries. These are the mysteries. This is why they talk in code. This is why they wear the apparel they do. These couriers could walk down a road unmolested because people actually feared the consequences of ever messing with any of these precinct couriers. If anybody touched them, they knew what the penalty was. So these people had dispatches going all over the ancient world. But people they didn't understand. The common people were hoodwinked into believing that something supernatural was happening, because the Greeks, you got to remember, they invented theatrics, the whole amphitheater, all the stage plays, all these great, have you guys ever read like The Birds? I can't remember, man, I just said his name the other day. Having brain farts today. So I can't remember. Anyway, there's so many awesome, great, they call them tragedies, but not all of them are tragic. but there's so many great Greek stage plays and stories, and this is what they did. This was their entertainment back then, and the oracle was the same way, but it was passed off as real. And sometimes it was one oracle would be, they would inhale gases. One oracle, they would be doing other types of divination. Sometimes it was some type of spiritual possession. Other times it was the goddess. They were channeling the goddess. It doesn't matter the packaging. The only thing that mattered was that the person that asked that question had to wait 4, 5, 6, 7 days, whatever. And next thing you know, 5 days after presenting the talent of silver and 3 goats, 5 days later, a priest would come out, look for him in the camps or surrounding the oracle. Hey, you need to come in. And they would bring them in. This is how they operated. People didn't go in there and get their answers immediately. They had to camp out. There are stories in the ancient world of people camping out for months for their answers. And they did, because different kings would send envoys out, and they already know, you better not come back to the kingdom without an answer, whether it's good or bad. Yeah, you got to stay there until the oracle's ready to answer. And many times, because of weather, because of invasions or whatever, news was delayed. So these couriers had this information, and maybe 5 or 6 days later, he's asked to come on in. He comes in, and he actually beholds really wild stuff. It's all staged for him to see that. He's convinced it's a holy sanctuary. He's convinced he needs to be quiet. He's told straight at the portal, look, anything you see in here, you can't tell anybody when you leave. He says, this is all between you and the goddess, or you and the Pythia, the priestess. And he would go in there, and this girl would be in there half naked, sometimes nude, and she would be covered in oil and sometimes flower petals, and sometimes her eyes would roll back in her head, and she would be on entheogens, drugged, imbibed. It doesn't matter. It's all staged. And she would utter something in probably a dialect of a language that they already know this man doesn't know. And she'll just go off, and then a priest will pretend to interpret it. Right there in front of him, he'll pretend to interpret it, but he's already got the message because he's already read the dispatch. And the dispatch is very clear that guy on the other side of the Aegean that he's asking about, who's sending ships of cargo, always suckers in people with the first 2 or 3 shipments, and then burns them for a whole fleet of ships when they decide to do a bigger order. And that's his reputation. And so they send that information back, and then the oracle, the priest, will tell the guy that they'll tell him in a rhyme, or they'll tell it in a code. They'll make it sound really legit, but they'll basically tell him the truth. But they'll make it sound like it's a divine oracle, as if this is coming from the gods. But that man has a black soul, and that in your future, if you continue to have dealings with men with black souls, your future is full of empty ships. It would tell him something like that, and he would interpret it the right way, which was, oh yeah, if I keep messing with this guy, then I'm going to get burned on a whole ship. A ship's going to show up, but it's not going to have any cargo for me. So this is just one example of the many tens of thousands. I mean, sometimes people paid the oracle for really stupid stuff. Sometimes it was about love. Sometimes it was about something menial. Other times it was very important. And the oracles always treated the elite. They always treated those who were the most important with the respect that was due to their echelon, because they didn't want to get a bad reputation. And that's the key here. You have to understand, no psyop is ever going to survive 1,000 years unbroken history if they had a bad reputation of being wrong. They weren't wrong. And the reason they weren't wrong is because they made people wait for the right answers. And they treated the right answer as if it was divinity revealed. This is how the oracles operated. And it's a genius system. It's a very old system, and it may not even be native to Greek. It may have come from Egypt. It may have come from Babylon or Sumer as well. But it's very easy to deceive people when they come to you with offerings and money, and they're asking you, hey man, is this going to happen? Or what? They already know. a lot of times that people could get their answer in 1 or 2 days. And the reason is because the dispatches were traveling. The oracles were intelligence agencies, and they were sharing information on a daily basis. They had agents in the harbors. And when Greek ships came in, Phoenician ships, if there were Libyans on board, they would drill them, say, hey, check this out. Uh, uh, I'll pay you such and such, man, for any news you have of such and such. And then many ship captains who were already members of the shipping guilds already knew every single time they came in to port. After they dealt with the harbor masters or local authorities, they already knew there were rendezvous points where they were expected, and they would be paid well for any information they have. But what they didn't know was the people that were writing that information took it straight back to the oracles. This is where the genius lies. People didn't know what was really going on. They just know that their information was valuable. People today aren't like people of thousands of years ago. When all this was going on, people kept their mouths shut. People didn't openly talk about things, especially things that weren't their business in ancient times, because you get your tongue cut out, or you could speak up. You could speak on somebody's business, and they could get offended, and then that all of a sudden triggers all kinds of legal problems. And most legal problems back then were dealt with violently. So it was a different world, and people knew that any information they had from overseas was very valuable because nobody over here had it. So the system was already in place. It's not like a bunch of priests had to leave the oracle and go travel to every time a new ship come in. No, they had been doing this for 1,000 years. So during that period, early on in that period, they had already perfected the ability to amass a tremendous amount of knowledge about everything that was going on in all the Greek states and all the surrounding countries. And it was easiest to do it through the shipping guilds, because the shipping guilds knew everything. So it was very easy when a local senator came to the oracle, or sent his envoy to the oracle with 60 pieces of gold and a purple bolt of cloth from Babylon, and said, hey, this is what I need to know. I said, I want to introduce a war measure against Thracia, and I need to know if we will be successful in our military endeavor if I get the Spartans on board, and the Athenians and the Spartans and the Molossians get together. If we invade Thracia, will we be successful? So when a question like this was asked, one thing that was done was the local priest would go through the records of everything that was going on contemporary around Macedonia and Thracia and its surrounding areas, and see what was going on. And if they found out, oh, look, this is going on right here. The Thracians are already at war with 2 other countries further north, and this has been going on for 7 years. So they also would automatically know what the military presence was like in southern Thracia. They would also know what Thracian economy was like, what was the morale of the Thracian people. These were intelligence agencies. They gathered all this information from all around the world, and there was nothing divine or mysterious or magical about anything that was happening in this whole Delphic, Dodona, and Didyma oracular program.
Hey guys, so it's that time where I need to ask you to subscribe to the channel. And if you're already subscribed, just hit the like, please. If you don't do this, I will be abducted by aliens. Thanks. That this amount of such a vast operation could be going on, and the people don't even know, and they think that they're doing things that connect them to gods, and really they're just participating in a giant psyop and intelligence operation. I mean, I just think that that's crazy, and it makes complete sense. And especially how we looked at the map of Greece, we could go back there. This is a lot of places, you know what I mean? And so it makes sense that all these places, there was just these hubs to run it through. right? Because this isn't one big kingdom, like the ones we've learned about so far, the Persian kingdom or the Hittites or, whatever. That was like one big people groups. But here in Greece, like we learned, they're city states with different people groups. So it would be a little harder to keep tabs on everything, right? So then they set up these hubs all over the place that were constantly had couriers coming through and people coming, and people would get information passed back and forth and all this stuff. So yeah, I just think it's crazy. It makes me have a lot of thoughts about today, what's going on today. You really have to watch out. You have to guard your mind, and you have to build pattern recognition. It's not hard to do. I don't know. I'm kind of hoping we can, do that as my channel grows and have topics about stuff like that. But pattern recognition is extremely important because it helps you recognize patterns and cycles that they're always doing to us. And then you don't get like wrapped up in it every single time. Okay, so just to recap on the oracles. So the old world featured a vast network of oracles. They were crucial centers for divine communication and guidance across diverse cultures. Delphi was the most renowned one. Delphi exerted significant influence on political, military, and personal decisions throughout the Hellenic world. It was sort of the main hub. And the oracles existed beyond Greece, so they were very widespread. It is believed that they were an intelligence operation. Seems to make sense. Literally insanity. Crazy, insane, smart. The people behind that and the people who were actually the movers and shakers above kings, senators, all the elite. What the heck? It's just mind-blowing. But moving on from there, we have still on ancient Greece. So great tales of espionage and subterfuge. So everyone, I'm sure, knows the story of the Trojan horse in the Iliad. And so people say that this might not be a true story, but then they also didn't think like Troy existed for a really long time, and now it does. So there's even old, what are those things called? I'm having a hard time coming up with the words today, but those engravings in stone on walls and stuff? There are things like that telling the story of the Trojan horse. So I don't know, but let's just say it was true. People talk about it as an ingenious, deceptive subterfuge operation. So basically, if you don't know, or if you need a refresher, the Athens, I believe it was, built a giant horse, a giant wooden horse. And the drawings and stuff you see of it makes it look like really ugly, like just sticks. But I think it was probably nicer looking than that. I imagine like a really smooth, beautiful horse. Because if it looked like that, I doubt they would have brought it into their city. And it was on these big wheels. The story goes, it was taken as, oh, it's an offering. Like they're making up with us and gave us this beautiful horse statue thing. And so then they brought it in, and there were lots of soldiers inside of the stomach and the mouth that then popped out at nighttime and, took over the city, opened the doors, and they got messed up and everything. So it was a covert operation of war. And then Odysseus infiltrated Troy as a slave to gather intel on the Trojans and determine their morale. So there's another story in the literature and the tales of that happening. And then Odysseus and Diomedes infiltrated behind Trojan lines at night and captured a Trojan who had been sent to spy on the Greeks. And then they interrogated him, then killed him, and then used the information to attack the camp of the Thracians, allies of the Trojans, killing their king Rheus. So lots of deception, lots of stuff like that in the tales, the myths and the stories and records. Although if you go to Greece, here we're taught that all that stuff is like myths. Over there, they're like, no, that's just our history. So who knows? But it's all very interesting. Okay, and then ancient Greece devices of espionage. The later Greeks used a skytail, an early encryption device that involved wrapping a material around a cylinder of a specific size. then writing a message, letter by letter, across each strip. Unwound, the strip of cloth would look like a random string of letters. The person receiving the message would wrap the strip around a cylinder of the same circumference, enabling them to place the letters in the correct order again. Anyone capturing the strip must first recognize it for what it is, and then correctly determine the size of the cylinder in order to decode the message. So this is just an example of the links they went to in the ancient world to conceal messages that they were sending around. So I find that really interesting. And now we are moving on to Rome. So Rome had a complicated intelligence agency that was put into place after Caesar, but before that, it was a little different. And of course, Hadrian is after Caesar, but I found this story and I thought that I would share it. The Frumentari, the ears and my board says ears and ears. Frumentari, the ears and eyes of the emperor. So there's a spelling check there. Or it's probably the eyes and the ears of the emperor. Anyway, so this is a story. Hadrian's vigilance was not confined to his own household, but extended to those of his friends, and by means of his private agents, the Frumentarios, he even pried into all their secrets, and so skillfully that they were never aware that the emperor was acquainted with their private lives until he revealed it himself. In this connection, the insertion of an incident will not be unwelcome, showing that he found out much about his friends. The wife of a certain man wrote to her husband, complaining that he was so preoccupied by pleasures and baths that he would not return home to her. And Hadrian found this out through his private agents. And so when the husband asked for a furlough, Hadrian reproached him with his fondness for his baths and his pleasures. Whereupon the man exclaimed, "What, did my wife write you just what she wrote to me?" So that's a legitimate story from ancient time, apparently. And I have a tab on ancient Rome. Okay, so before I pull up the article, I've got this, I'll just read the article to you, but I've got this chalkboard up that we'll kind of go over a little bit. So Spycraft before the emperors, because before Caesar, there were no emperors, and Rome was ran by a senate. And over time, the number of senate members changed, but it was 300 to 900 men that were elite people. And then as it got closer to the end of that, which I mean, it still existed, but not the same way as before, but they started allowing more people from other classes to join in, and that's why it got up to 900 to 1,000. Okay, so firstly, the Romans did not have a formal intelligence service as we understand it today. The reluctance to develop such organizations stemmed from their unique way its republican government had developed. The Roman Senate, which was comprised of men from wealthy upper class families, acted with a certain amount of class loyalty that allowed the state to push its interest and expand overseas. But the Senate was not of one mind. There was always tremendous personal competition among individuals and families for the wealth and glory that such conquest created. To further their parochial ends, these men needed to know what others were doing and planning, and they used their private intelligence networks to advance their own careers. Romans had no qualms about using espionage on a personal level. Every Roman aristocrat had his private network of business associates, informers, clansmen, slaves, or agents, male and female, who would keep him informed on the latest happenings in the Senate, the activities of rival families, or the goings on in his own home. So they used their own private intelligence networks. They did not have a formal intelligence service, like as in one central one, right? The Senate was not of one mind. Tremendous personal competition among individuals and families. Okay, so they want to advance. They want to make plans to that degree. So they've all got their own spy networks, which was probably like a better idea, honestly, than having like one central one that can then take over and go rogue and who knows what, which that will come up later. So when I kind of think about it, I'm kind of like, that's probably not a bad idea, you know? Then after Caesar died. So that's sort of what was going on. Then Caesar became emperor, right? And he was sort of like a dictator. and the Senate wasn't very happy about that, as we all know from history. On the Ides of March in 44 BC, during a meeting of the Senate at the temporary Curia in the theater at Pompeii in Rome, the Roman dictator Gaius Julius Caesar was murdered by a group of senators opposed to his dictatorship. Then Caesar's adopted heir Octavius was elected to imperial power. He was cognizant of the threat of assassination, and then he took the title of Augustus. So Augustus is Octavianus. The new emperor was fully aware that the most likely conspirators would be from the upper echelons of Roman society, from the equestrian and senatorial classes. With this in mind, undercover informers, known as informators, who were generally chosen from the Praetorian Guard, either at the rank of the centurion home or tribune, were tasked with arresting anyone plotting against the emperor. To uncover such plots necessitated informators to operate at the higher levels of Roman bureaucracy, often requiring them to develop contacts or cooperate with state-level procurators. So there is this vast setup, the way that they did it, and that's what we're going over each one of these. Provocateurs, much like the informators already mentioned, provocateurs were also tasked with identifying disloyalty toward the emperor. They operated undercover within Roman territory, aiming to gain the trust of those they were investigating. Having done so, it would be believed provocateurs would provoke the intended target, for example, to speak ill of the emperor. Should the target follow the provocateur's lead, then said individual would have effectively entrapped himself and be arrested. Like, what if he was just like freaked out by the guy and didn't want to, like, it's a bad system. Explorators, as their name implies, it means to explore, investigate, to examine. They were the scouts of the Roman army. In the early years of the Principate, soldiers selected from the auxiliary cavalry. The auxiliary cavalry were detached from their units for a length of time for this purpose. We know little, however, about how the explorators were organized, but if they were drawn largely from the cavalry, then the smallest operational unit probably would be a turma consisting of 30 horsemen commanded by a decurion. Although relatively small, these mounted patrols had the flexibility to range far and wide, reconnoitering ahead of the flanks of the legion's main body to detect the enemy. It's worth remembering that while each terma could protect itself, explorators were not intended to engage with an enemy force, but rather gather information and report back on its location, strength, activity, and direction of movement. As part of their mission, explorators also reconned the terrain to identify landmarks or locate obstacles that might hinder or slow a legion's advance. The latter might include forest, woodland, mountainous ridges, valleys, rivers, or wetlands. In doing so, their task would most probably also involve identifying possible crossing points. One final task each day would be to locate a favorable site for construction for the legion's marching camp. And they also probably took messages, stuff like that. It seems explorators were very much the tactical reconnaissance units of the Roman army. The information they gathered would have informed legion's commanders of the immediate intelligence picture while on campaign. At the operational or strategic level, however, information was always needed to protect the empire's best interests, identifying unrest in its far-flung provinces and any internal threats posed to its borders. Enter the frumentari. Frumentari, on the face of it, were grain collectors. After all, it means grain. Working for the military commissariat, they were tasked with ensuring the army was reliably supplied with the staple of the Mediterranean diet. There were two main sources of information about the frumentari: inscriptions on gravestones and anecdotes where the actions of individual frumentari were mentioned by historians. From inscriptions, albeit except for a few named centurions, it seems clear that the frumentari were mostly attached to individual legions. This strongly supports the idea that their main function was, as their name suggests, to service those legions with grain supplies. These duties would have necessarily involved a lot of traveling and brought the frumentari into contact with enough locals and natives to acquire considerable information about any given territory. Knowledge of the geography, landmarks, communication routes, and strategic objectives such as settlements, farms, or granaries would have been valuable military intelligence. With the frumentari ranging far and wide, it seems probable that in the 2nd century AD, Emperor Trajan added the role of couriers charged with the conveyance of military dispatches to their task. By the time of Emperor Hadrian succeeded to the throne, the need for an empire-wide intelligence service had become clear, yet establishing and funding a new service tasked with secretly spying on the empire's citizens was not as straightforward as it might seem. Envisioning the large scale of the operation, Hadrian followed his predecessor's example and turned his private agents, presumably the frumentarii, to be ready-made information-gathering service and couriers of official messages. The life of Commodatus is reported that the emperor's praetorian prefects had a particular individual who was felt to exert a negative influence over the emperor, assassinated by means of their private agents. Once again, the use of the term private agents may allude to the clandestine activities of the frumentarii. And it says that their duties evolved over time, developing from their initial connection as a grain supply and necessity to travel between Rome and its provinces. Frumentarius appeared to have belonged to a particular legion. They seemed to have a central bureaucracy in the Castra Praetoriana camp of the foreigners. Their freedom of movement no doubt led to their employment throughout the 2nd century as couriers and messengers. The clandestine nature of the frumentaries' task may have been exploited so that on occasion they may have acted as imperial assassins, but more often than not they represented the forces of law and order. The speculators. In both the legions and in the Praetorian camp, speculators were initially scouts tasked with gathering as much information as possible about the enemy. It should be fairly evident, therefore, that was collected by speculators and the more numerous explorators often overlapped. And so they became imperial bodyguards, couriers, law enforcement, and sometimes executioners. So they sorted it a lot. They wore plain clothes to blend in. Units were organized in the standard legion manner, led by a centurion and his chosen man, or optio, and commanded by the centurio spectalorum when accompanying the emperor on military campaigns. Speculators were imperial bodyguards. Frumentarii were the secret police, essentially, like a lot of other articles called them that. Explorators were scouts of the Roman army. Provocators were tasked with identifying disloyalty toward the emperor, and informators were tasked with arresting anyone plotting against the emperor, and they probably were like informing on everyone, right? So sort of seems like they would need to have a lot more going on. When I was researching this and I came into the ancient Rome, I thought compared to like the Greece oracle thing and then what we're going to go over next, I'm like, you would think because Rome was so big. So maybe they just don't know enough, or I didn't find enough good information. Okay, so now we're moving on to ancient China and India, which had insanely complex and vast spy networks. So I've got that pulled up and I am going to read a little bit about the Chinese first. Ancient China's spycraft was a sophisticated and well-documented practice deeply embedded in military and political strategy for millennia. The earliest known records of espionage in China date back over 3,000 years, with the commentary of Zhao documenting the use of spies by deposed Emperor Shao Kang to investigate his usurper's son. The foundational text on the subject, The Art of War, by Sun Tzu, written in the 5th century BC, dictates its final chapter to using spies and outlines a comprehensive system of 5 distinct spy types. This framework, which emphasized exploiting human psychology and organizational vulnerabilities, became the cornerstone of Chinese military doctrine and influenced intelligence operations for centuries. The practice of espionage was not limited to theory, it was actively employed with remarkable success. For example, during the Northern and Southern dynasties, the emperor used a forged letter meticulously crafted to mimic the handwriting and weathering of his enemy, General Niu Dajing, to sow distrust between Niu and his superior, ultimately leading to Niu's capture and the defeat of the Eastern Wei forces. Similarly, the Qin state is believed to have used spies to undermine Zhou state during the pivotal battle of Shangping in 260 BC, contributing to a decisive victory. The use of deception extended into psychological warfare, such as the famous ruse by Liu Bang's strategist Qin Ping, who used gold to spread rumors that turned the Xiongnu leader Xing Yu against his own trusted advisor Feng Xing. Beyond human intelligence, ancient China spycraft incorporated a variety of ingenious tools and techniques. The earthen jar, a large ceramic vessel buried deep underground with a leather-covered mouth, served as an early form of wiretap, allowing spies to eavesdrop on conversations from a distance. Invisible ink, made from water mixed with alum or rice water, was used to write secret messages that could only be revealed by soaking the paper in water. For long-distance signaling, kites were used. They were flown in a certain way to convey messages. With the Han Dynasty, General Han Xin reportedly used one to signal a rebellion over 2,000 years ago. Cryptographic methods were also developed, including the Yinfu tally system, where two matching halves were held by different individuals to verify identity. The Fanji code, created by General Qi Ziyang in the 16th century, which used complex character combinations as phonetic symbols to encode military information. The ethical dimensions of espionage were debated, with Confucian scholars often criticizing its methods as contrary to virtues like sincerity and righteousness. However, historical figures like Zhu Feng, who wrote the Book of Spies in 1855, argued that enlightened rulers and sages throughout history had relied on spies, justifying the practice as necessary tool for statecraft. This tradition of state-sponsored intelligence, rooted in the ancient texts and practices, has persisted and evolved, with modern scholars noting that the People's Republic of China intelligence activities include cyber warfare and influence operations, reflect a continuation of these historic principles. The legacy of ancient spycraft, from Sun Tzu's 5 Spies to the use of invisible ink and kites, demonstrates a long-standing and sophisticated tradition of intelligence gathering that remains relevant in the modern era. Okay, so you guys might have noticed that this thing that I'm reading said the People's Republic of China. I wonder if anybody caught that that's what it's called today, the People's Republic of China. So where did it go? Because I noted it in my head. So I'll read the sentence again. This tradition of state-sponsored intelligence, rooted in ancient texts and practices, has persisted and evolved, with modern scholars noting that the People's Republic of China's intelligence activities, including cyber warfare and the influence operations, reflect a continuation of these historical principles. People might want to look into that. I'm not going to get into it today, but I'm sure we will as we move along. But, a lot of stuff we're not told. Okay, so, and I'm not going to do a big long thing on China because I want to spend more time on India, because I feel like India doesn't get as much attention as other, like oftentimes we don't learn about India, right? And I want to watch this video because they had, out of everyone except for maybe the oracles, a very crazy, well, it probably was the same, it was just a different, it was as crazy, it's just a different way of doing it. And it's the guy who wrote that writing, the Artharashtra. Sorry, I'm not going to pronounce any of this stuff correctly. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Hopefully I can get better at that over time, so please just forgive me for now. But anyway, I feel like we don't learn much about India, so I found a video that explains it really well, but I also do have a article, I think. Ancient Indian spycraft was sophisticated and deeply integrated component of statecraft governance and military strategy, with roots tracing back to the Vedic period. References to spies known as Spasa or Spash in Sanskrit appear in the Rig Veda 1500 to 1000 BC, where they were described as sweet-spoken and antisocial individuals tasked with protecting the masses and ousting the wicked, indicating one of the oldest known professions related to intelligence gathering. The Vedic god Indra is also said to have used an intelligence network to monitor events in Swargalok. The Manusmriti, dated to the 2nd century BC, established the principle that spies are king's eyes and described 5 classes of spies responsible for detecting crimes and assessing the strength of the king and his enemies. The Mahabharata further illustrates the use of espionage and political maneuvering, with figures like Lord Krishna and Vindura employing secret networks to gather intelligence and warn the Pandivas, I know I'm not saying that right, of plots such as the Lagashwargara incident. The epic also advises that spies should resemble imbeciles, the blind or deaf, and possess the ability to endure hunger, thirst, and hardship. The most comprehensive and systematic treaty on ancient Indian espionage is the Artharashtra. And I would say, like, for the ancient kingdom, this document, which is like a big treaty, like it says, is just crazy. Attributed to Kalutala or Chanakya around the 4th century BC during the Mauryan Empire, it outlines a highly structured intelligence apparatus with two main categories: fixed spies and wandering spies. Fixed spies were stationed in foreign kingdoms, forests, or dubious areas, often posing as merchants, recluses, householders, ascetics. Wandering spies were deployed for more aggressive tasks, including infiltration, sabotage, assassination, and the use of poisons. These spies were recruited from diverse backgrounds, including eunuchs, tantrics, goldsmiths, bards, buffoons, astrologers, physicians, and even women who were deployed as mendicants, wandering nuns, and courtesans. Oh, that's another thing I didn't mention about with Greece and Rome. Those temples too, like there were temples where you'd go and like worship the god by, with the women in there or whatever. Those were probably intelligence gathering places too, because people talk in intimate situations and stuff like that. And then even I feel like religious things had to have a lot of that stuff going on. Think about even Rome, the Catholic Church, no offense to any Catholics, like of course, the higher ups that were controlling kings and kingdoms and stuff like that, the priests and stuff that were involved politically, but then they were having people come and confess to them. I'm sure that was used in ways too, right? So it's just interesting to think about. His system included advanced tactics such as the use of double agents, counterintelligence, and psychological manipulation. He recommended that spies infiltrate corporations by sowing dissension among members, provoke quarrels among leaders in public places, and use false prophecies to gain influence. The Artharashtra also details a sleeper cell strategy where spies were sent to settle in target states and become citizens with their families, maintained and cared for by the state to ensure loyalty through both inducement and threat. The text even suggests that some spies could receive wages from both their home and host states, reflecting an early concept of double agents. The espionage system served multiple objectives: reporting covert operations and ensuring the loyalty of civilian servants and high officials. It extended to monitoring external dissent, corrupt officials, and rebellious elements within the army and populace. The system was so advanced that it surpassed contemporary models in Egypt, China, and Rome. Under Chandragupta Maurya, the system was instrumental in overthrowing the Nanda dynasty and consolidating the Mauryan Empire. Later, Emperor Akosha used a network of Mahamantras for moral surveillance to enforce his Dhamma policy. Okay, so very intense, right? And so I just want to go over our chart really quick. Okay, so ancient Chinese intelligence methods were diverse and innovative, not limited to military strategy, but extended to political intrigue and statecraft. The concept of knowing men, the ability to evaluate and recruit agents based on human psychology, I found that really interesting. So for India, Spycraft was sophisticated and deeply integrated. Most comprehensive treatise on statecraft and espionage is the Artharashtra, attributed to Kalutaya, tracing back to the earliest Vedic text, so going really far back. And so I have a video on this guy and like everything he did. And unfortunately, like I was saying earlier in the video, there were not a lot of videos online that were, like I said, people who know stuff, where you can actually hear a person talking, like giving a lecture or being interviewed for a podcast or just being like, oh, I'm going over this or whatever. So most of it was AI and not very good ones, but I did find a good one that was legit, because you have to be careful with some of those, and it's not too like annoying or weird, but just heads up, it is AI. I'm sorry. So this is called Ancient Indians, CIA, the Emperor's Secret Agents.
The streets of ancient Pataliputra were alive with the hum of a bustling empire. Merchants hawked their wares beneath flickering torchlight, the scent of spices and incense mingling in the warm night air. But beneath the surface, a silent war was unfolding, a war of information, where whispers could topple kings and rumors could kill more effectively than swords. Among the crowds walked figures who seemed ordinary: a humble monk, a traveling merchant, a servant carrying water. Yet, behind their ordinary masks, they were anything but common. They were the eyes and ears of the Mauryan Empire, the hidden agents of one of the first and most sophisticated spy networks the world had ever seen. These men and women wielded secrets as weapons, shaping the fate of nations from the shadows. Before we dive deeper into this untold story, take a moment to connect with our growing community of history seekers and truth hunters. Tell us in the comments where you be watching from and what time it is there right now. It, as always, incredible to see viewers from every corner of the world coming together for these ancient mysteries. And if you love uncovering the hidden side of history, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Ancient Spy Files so you never miss an episode. Your support helps us keep shining a light on these forgotten stories of intrigue and power. Centuries before the rise of Rome or the Mongol Empire, long before modern intelligence agencies like the CIA or MI6 existed, there was a kingdom in ancient India that understood a profound truth. Empires are not built by armies alone. They are built by knowledge of enemies, allies, and even one's own people. In the 4th century BCE, the Mauryan Empire emerged as one of the greatest powers of the ancient world. Under the visionary leadership of Chandragupta Maurya, it united vast territories that had previously been fractured into warring kingdoms. But this unification didn't happen through brute strength alone. It was achieved through strategy, manipulation, and an invisible army of spies. At the heart of this invisible war was a single man, Chanakya, also known as Kautilya, the legendary strategist and philosopher who authored the Arthashastra, a treatise that remains one of the most advanced political and military manuals ever written. Chanakya understood that rulers must see everything, hear everything, and act before threats even materialized. He designed a network of spies that infiltrated every level of society, from royal palaces to village marketplaces, ensuring that no secret remained hidden from the emperor. This was not espionage as we think of it today, with satellites and cyber warfare. It was espionage at its rawest and most dangerous, carried out face to face, with nothing but human cunning and deception. These ancient spies risked their lives every day, operating in a world where discovery meant brutal execution. And yet, through their sacrifices, the Mauryan Empire grew stronger, outmaneuvering rivals and crushing rebellions before they could even begin. The origins of this network can be traced to a time of chaos. Before Chandragupta's rise, northern India was a patchwork of competing kingdoms, each scheming against the others. Foreign powers, including remnants of Alexander the Great's armies, hovered at the borders, eager to exploit the region's instability. In this fractured landscape, open warfare was constant, but it was also costly and unpredictable. Chanakya, a brilliant scholar and political mastermind, saw a different path. Why fight endless battles in the open when you could control events from the shadows? Chanakya's philosophy was simple but revolutionary. The most efficient way to defeat an enemy is to destroy their will to fight before the battle even begins. To do this, he needed information, and to gather that information, he needed spies. But not just any spies. He envisioned a system where agents would be embedded so deeply within enemy societies that they could influence events at the highest levels. These weren't mere informants. They were puppet masters, pulling the strings of kings and generals without ever revealing their true identities. To build this network, Chanakya drew from all walks of life. Merchants were particularly valuable as they could travel freely between kingdoms, asking questions under the guise of trade. Monks and ascetics were also ideal, since their spiritual status allowed them access to places and conversations that were off limits to ordinary citizens. Even entertainers, such as dancers and musicians, were recruited, as their performances granted them entry to royal courts, where they could overhear crucial conversations. In some cases, women were trained as spies, using their positions within palaces to gather secrets that men could never access. This diversity made the network nearly impossible to detect, as spies could be hiding anywhere, in anyone. Chanakya's brilliance lay not just in recruiting spies, but in structuring the network to maximize its effectiveness. Each agent operated within a carefully designed hierarchy. Field operatives reported to handlers, who in turn reported to regional coordinators. Only the highest-ranking members had a complete picture of the network's scope. This compartmentalization ensured that if one spy was captured, they could not expose the entire system.
Okay, so that sounds a lot like our intelligence agencies now and our CIA and stuff where things are compartmentalized. Nobody really knows what's going on, right? They're compartmentalized even from people in the top. And it's not until maybe you get like a congressional hearing and you might find something out or whatever. So this whole like thing is very interesting.
Messages were encoded using ingenious methods. Sometimes they were hidden in hollowed-out objects, like bamboo tubes, or disguised within religious texts. Other times, messages were delivered orally, using code words and memorized scripts. One particularly creative method involved using trained pigeons to carry messages across vast distances, an early form of aerial communication. These techniques allowed information to flow rapidly and securely, giving the Marian rulers a near-constant stream of intelligence about enemy movements, political plots, and even natural disasters that could affect the stability of the realm. The network also relied heavily on psychological manipulation. Chanakya understood that raw information was not enough. It had to be weaponized. Spies were tasked not only with gathering intelligence, but with shaping perceptions. They spread rumors
Psychological warfare, very similar.
to destabilize rival kingdoms, planted false evidence to turn allies into enemies, and carefully crafted narratives that guided public opinion. In many cases, an enemy city would crumble from within before the Mauryan army even arrived, its leaders paralyzed by mistrust and fear. As Chandragupta Maurya consolidated his power, the spy network became an extension of his own will. Though he ruled from the magnificent capital of Pataliputra, his influence reached into the most distant corners of the empire through the eyes and ears of his agents. A rebellion brewing hundreds of miles away might be quashed before it ever reached the point of open conflict, simply because a spy embedded in the rebel group had reported its plans in advance. This level of control gave Chandragupta a godlike presence in the minds of his subjects. People began to believe that the emperor knew everything, saw everything, and could strike at any moment. In truth, it was the network of spies that created this illusion of omnipotence. Fear of the invisible was more powerful than any army. One famous account tells of a nobleman who plotted to assassinate Chandragupta. The plan was flawless, or so he thought. But on the very night he prepared to act, imperial guards stormed his house and arrested him, before he had even voiced his intentions to anyone. How did the emperor know? The answer was simple. There had been a spy among the nobleman's servants the entire time, listening and reporting every detail. This story spread like wildfire, deterring countless others from even considering rebellion. The Mauryan spies did not operate only within their own empire. They were also active in neighboring kingdoms, gathering intelligence about foreign rulers and military movements. Some spies lived undercover in enemy territories for years, slowly climbing the ranks of foreign governments or armies. In this way, the Mauryans could influence external politics to their advantage. A rival kingdom might find itself suddenly embroiled in civil war, a conflict secretly instigated by Mauryan agents. One of the most dramatic examples of this strategy involved remnants of Alexander the Great's empire. After Alexander's death, his generals divided his vast territories among themselves, creating a network of Hellenistic states that often clashed with one another. The Mauryan spies exploited these rivalries, feeding misinformation to keep the Greek states divided and distracted. By the time Chandragupta's armies moved westward, his enemies were too busy fighting each other to mount a coordinated defense. It was a masterstroke of geopolitical manipulation, achieved not through direct confrontation, but through whispers and lies. While the spy network was undeniably effective, it also raised profound ethical questions. Chanakya himself wrestled with the moral implications of his work. In his writings, he argued that the stability of the state justified almost any action, including deception and assassination. A ruler, he wrote, must sometimes act in ways that seem cruel, for the sake of the greater good. To the Mauryan rulers,
I feel like all this deception, though, yes, it is good because you need to know things to keep things stable for the good of everybody. But then I feel like the lies upon lies and deceptive practices, as they grow and multiply and become a multitude of just degenerateness, that affects, you know, the kingdom or the population or whatever over time, and it degrades it. You know what I mean? So it's sort of a moral quandrum in a way.
The spies were heroes, protectors of the realm. But to those who lived under constant surveillance, they were a source of fear and paranoia. No one could be certain who to trust. A friend, a neighbor, even a family member might secretly be an agent of the emperor. This culture of suspicion created a society where rebellion was nearly impossible, but it also bred resentment that would simmer for.
I forgot to mention when we were on Rome that the Frumentari, they actually became so oppressive that the people started getting really agitated with them, and it started fomenting dissent because they were getting messed with all the time. And, you know, and so I'm just saying, like, this breeds almost like, you know, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
Generations. As we conclude this first chapter, it's important to recognize just how revolutionary this system was. The Mauryan spy network wasn't just a tool of its time. It was the prototype for every intelligence agency that followed. The principles Chanakya developed, compartmentalization, psychological warfare, disinformation, are still used by modern spy organizations today. In many ways, when we speak of espionage in the modern world, we are echoing techniques first perfected over 2,000 years ago. But the story of these ancient spies is far from over. In the next chapter, we will step deeper into their world, exploring the secret training methods, the incredible disguises, and the legendary missions that define this network. We will meet the men and women who risked everything to serve the Emperor's vision, and we will uncover the dark truths behind their success. For now, consider this. While history remembers the great battles and mighty rulers, it is often the invisible forces, the whispers in the dark, that truly shape the destiny of civilizations. And nowhere is that truer than in the shadowed streets of ancient India, where an empire was built not just on swords and elephants, but on secrets. In the dimly lit corridors of the Mauryan capital, Pataliputra, secrets were currency, and the most valuable coins were whispers carried by unseen mouths. To the common people, the city was a place of grandeur, marble palaces, lush gardens, and bustling markets alive with the colors and sounds of an empire at its peak. But beneath this surface beauty existed another city, hidden in plain sight, a city of shadows where spies moved silently, blending among monks, merchants, and beggars. Here, deception was not just a skill, it was a way of life. Chanakya, the mastermind behind this network, knew that spies could not simply be recruited and sent into the world. They had to be forged, shaped into instruments of absolute precision. A single mistake could mean not just the death of the spy, but the unraveling of an entire operation. And so, within the heart of the capital, secret facilities were established, places known only to the emperor and a handful of trusted advisors. These were not training grounds in the traditional sense. There were no flags, no parades, no fanfare. They were quiet, anonymous structures, indistinguishable from temples or warehouses, where men and women were stripped of their former lives and rebuilt as tools of the state. The first lesson every recruit learned was to disappear in plain sight. A spy who looked like a spy was already a dead man walking. Chanakya taught them to become anyone, to wear identities like garments. One day, a trainee might be dressed as a humble farmer, hands calloused and posture bent. The next, they would be adorned in the silks of a nobleman, speaking with the confidence of one born to privilege. Disguise went far beyond clothing. It required mastery of voice, gesture, and thought. A spy pretending to be a merchant had to know not just the prices of goods, but the rhythms of trade, the slang of caravan routes, the subtle signals exchanged between buyers and sellers. An assassin posing as a monk had to embody serenity, walking and speaking with the calm authority of the devout. Even the way they breathed was rehearsed until it became second nature. Chanakya believed that the most dangerous enemy was predictability. His spies learned to abandon habits, to erase personal quirks that might give them away. In time, they became ghosts, men and women who no longer had a single true identity, only the shifting masks they wore. To maintain control over such a vast network, Chanakya divided his spies into 5 specialized branches, each with its own purpose. These divisions were known collectively as the 5 Shadows.
That's so crazy, that they would need to be so, and then it's like this network of shadowy figures that are the ones that are deciding things, and we don't even know its powers beyond our comprehension to know what's happening.
A system so advanced that echoes of it can still be seen in modern intelligence agencies. The Watchers, masters of observation and infiltration. They embedded themselves in enemy cities, markets, and courts, gathering intelligence without interfering directly. The Whisperers, experts in spreading disinformation. They seeded rumors that could spark paranoia, uprisings, or even civil wars. The Hands of Justice, silent enforcers.
So that happens a lot. The disinformation, I think it's really important to focus on a lot because I see it all the time. I see it everywhere and it's only getting worse all the time. Nothing but disinformation or things worded in ways to manipulate you into an emotional response. That is 90% of everything on social media, definitely in news, legacy media, articles. Everything is disinformation and propaganda.
Tasked with eliminating traitors, enemy agents, or targets whose survival threatened the empire. The Shadows of the Road. Mobile operatives who traveled disguised as traders or pilgrims, carrying messages across the empire with astonishing speed and secrecy. The Ghosts, the most mysterious of all. These agents operated independently, answering only to Chanakya himself. Their missions were known to no one else, and their identities were erased even from official records. This system allowed the Mauryan spies to operate with terrifying efficiency. Each branch knew only its own tasks, never the full scope of the network. If one group was compromised, the others remained intact. It was an ancient form of compartmentalization, centuries ahead. The training process was grueling, not just physically but psychologically. Trainees were taught to lie so convincingly that they could fool even themselves. Exercises involved infiltrating simulated villages filled with other spies posing as civilians. The recruits had to gather intelligence without being detected, using every trick of charm, intimidation, and deception. Failure was not punished with death, not yet. Instead, it was met with something worse, erasure. A failed spy's name was struck from the records, their existence officially denied. They became nothing, a warning to others of what awaited those who faltered. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of training was the final test, known only as the Night of Masks. Recruits were blindfolded and taken to an undisclosed location. There, they were given a mission: infiltrate a heavily guarded compound and retrieve a hidden scroll. Unknown to them, half of the guards were fellow trainees, and half were real Imperial soldiers who believed they were defending the Emperor's treasure. A single mistake could mean real death. Those who succeeded emerged as full-fledged operatives. Those who failed vanished, their stories swallowed by the darkness. As the network grew, stories began to circulate of missions so audacious they seemed like myths. One such tale spoke of a spy named Vishaka, a woman trained as a court entertainer. She was sent to the rival kingdom of Kalinga, where she used her charm and wit to gain the trust of the royal family. Over years of careful manipulation, she became a trusted confidant of the queen. When war finally loomed between Kalinga and the Mauryan Empire, Vishaka planted subtle lies that turned the queen against her own generals. By the time the Mauryan army marched, Kalinga was already in chaos. The city surrendered without a single siege weapon being fired. To the public, it seemed like a miracle. To Chanakya, it was simply another victory won in the shadows. Another mission involved a group of whisperers who infiltrated a rebellious province. Rather than confronting the rebels directly, they spread rumors of betrayal among their ranks. Secret messages were accidentally intercepted, suggesting that the rebel leaders were plotting against each other. Within weeks, the rebellion collapsed into infighting, and the Mauryan forces entered unopposed. No blood was spilled, no battles fought, only words, carefully chosen and perfectly timed. But such victories came at a cost. The very secrecy that made the network powerful also made it fragile. Spies were forbidden from forming attachments or speaking of their work. Many lived under false identities for so long that they lost all sense of self. Some began to question their loyalty, wondering whether the empire they served truly deserved such sacrifice.
So this is where it gets interesting, especially the ending. And this is sort of dangerous. It's not healthy, you know?
A few even turned traitors, selling secrets to foreign powers in exchange for wealth or freedom. Chanakya anticipated this and built layers of surveillance within the network itself. Spies were assigned to monitor other spies, creating a web of mutual suspicion. Betrayal was punished swiftly and publicly. Captured traitors were paraded through the streets before vanishing forever into the darkness. This culture of fear kept.
It sort of reminds me of when I was listening to this just now, it sort of reminded me of the Soviet Union when Stalin was there and how horrific it was for everybody. Everyone was always reporting on each other, scared to death, living in fear, and then he would just randomly pick people in his close advisors and stuff to just kill for no reason. When his successor came on, he was having a hard time gaining control over the Soviets and especially the Stalinists or whatever. So he did this unusual thing where he just did this speech. It's called the secret speech. And it wasn't secret like the speech itself, but the speech was about secret stuff, which everybody kind of knew, but he admitted to it. It was a whole slew of all the horrific crimes against humanity and terrible things that Stalin had done so that he could manipulate everyone into hating Stalin so that he could get them to his side or whatever. Once again, manipulation, deceptiveness, all upon the people. It's very odd.
The network functioning, but it also planted seeds of paranoia that would one day threaten to destroy it from within. To the outside world, Chandragupta Maurya appeared to be a ruler of almost supernatural foresight. He seemed to know his enemies' plans before they were even conceived. Cities surrendered without resistance, rebellions dissolved before they began, and rival kingdoms fell into chaos without the Mauryan army lifting a sword. This illusion of omniscience was carefully cultivated by Chanakya's network. When foreign diplomats visited the capital, they were subtly guided through areas where spies whispered false information, just loudly enough to be overheard. When rebellions were quashed, the emperor made sure the punishments were dramatic and public, reinforcing the belief that resistance was hopeless. Fear itself became a weapon, wielded with precision and skill. This strategy extended beyond the empire's borders. Spies in distant lands spread tales of Mauryan invincibility, inflating the size of its armies and the reach of its power. In some cases, foreign rulers chose to become allies or vassals, simply to avoid provoking a war they believed they could never win. The Mauryan Empire expanded not just through conquest, but through the careful management of perception, a concept as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. By the height of Chandragupta's reign, the spy network had become a state within a state. It operated independently of the military, the courts, and even the emperor himself. Chanakya alone held the threads, weaving.
See, that's very much like our CIA. They're just sort of like operating, on their own.
Them into a tapestry of deception that stretched across the known world. And yet, for all its power, the network remained invisible. The common people never saw the spies who shaped their lives. They saw only the outcomes, a rebellion crushed before it began, a foreign enemy mysteriously weakened, a ruler who seemed untouchable. In their minds,
if you pay attention, you can see them too. You can see what they were just saying, the remnants of it happening, but you never really see it happening,
These events were acts of fate or divine will. Only a few understood the truth that behind every miracle was a carefully calculated series.
Oh, that reminds me of the oracles where everybody thought that they were actually getting messages from the gods and stuff like that.
Of actions carried out by men and women whose names would never be known. But even as the network reached its zenith, dangers were brewing. Neighboring kingdoms, once ignorant of the Mauryan methods, began to develop spy systems of their own. Foreign agents infiltrated the empire, turning Chanakya's techniques against him. At the same time, internal factions within the network grew restless. Some
Oh, maybe he didn't have a good enough counterintelligence going on.
questioned whether Chanakya's vision truly served the emperor, or whether the spy master had become too powerful to be trusted. In the next chapter, we will step into this rising storm. Betrayals will come to light, and the very system that held the empire together will begin to fracture. For while spies can control the world from the shadows, they cannot escape the darkness they create. And when shadows fight shadows, even the brightest empire can fall. The night air in Pataliputra was thick with unease. The bustling capital of the Mauryan Empire was still a city of splendor, its palaces gleaming beneath the torchlight, its markets overflowing with goods from across the known world. Yet beneath the opulence, a silent tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. The spy network that had once made Chandragupta's empire untouchable was beginning to fracture. For the first time, the whispers that had always served the emperor now carried notes of dissent and rebellion. Chanakya had always believed his system to be unbreakable. It was built on secrecy, compartmentalization, and fear. Each branch of the five shadows operated independently, with no knowledge of the other's missions. A captured spy
So that happens a lot too nowadays. There's all these different operations. Like other operation people have no idea those are even going on, and they actually cause a lot of problems because they will infiltrate. Let's take the Oklahoma bombing, and they were white. I don't know if I can say that word, but you know what I'm saying. There were a bunch of groups of them. They were up in the northern states, Idaho, Minnesota, I don't know. They were up in the northern states, and there were like several different groups and stuff. They were pretty big back then, and they were infiltrating them with undercover agents, and some were CIA and some were FBI, but they had no idea that these other people were agents either, and they were up to things that were countered the other things, and that caused like a bunch of problems to happen, which maybe we'll go over someday. And what they do is they sort of like instigate the whole stuff so that they can catch it happening, but then sometimes they don't. So yeah.
They could never compromise the entire network. But this strength was also a weakness. If one branch turned rogue, there would be no warning until the damage was done. And now, Chanakya was beginning to see the signs, subtle, scattered anomalies that only a master of intrigue would notice. Reports began arriving late or not at all. Missions that had always run smoothly started to falter. Some spies returned from assignments with inconsistent stories, their eyes betraying a guilt they dared not speak. Chanakya's instincts screamed at him. Someone was playing a dangerous game, perhaps several others. But was it an external enemy, or had rot set in within his own creation? For years, the Mauryan Empire had enjoyed a monopoly on espionage. Their methods were so advanced, their reach so vast, that rival kingdoms were powerless to resist. But empires breed envy, and envy breeds imitation. Foreign rulers, humiliated by their repeated defeats, began to study the Mauryan techniques. They sent emissaries disguised as traders and scholars, who observed carefully and carried their findings home. Over time, neighboring states began to develop spy networks of their own, crude at first, but growing steadily more sophisticated. The greatest threat came from the remnants of Alexander the Great's empire in the west. These Hellenistic states were fractured, but they were also cunning. Greek tacticians had long valued strategy and deception, and now they turned their brilliance toward countering the Mauryan system. They began planting double agents, men and women, who pretended loyalty to the Mauryan cause while secretly serving foreign masters. These infiltrators fed false information back to Chanakya, leading his forces into traps and wasting resources on phantom threats. One infamous incident nearly shattered the empire's western frontier. A high-ranking watcher reported that a neighboring king was preparing to invade with a massive army. Mauryan forces mobilized, marching hundreds of miles to intercept the threat, only to find empty plains. While the emperor's soldiers were distracted, a real enemy force struck elsewhere, seizing several key outposts. The mastermind behind this deception was never caught. To this day, historians debate whether he was a foreign agent or a traitor from within. Even as foreign spies crept into the network, internal tensions were growing. The five shadows had been designed to serve a single purpose: the protection and expansion of the Mauryan Empire. But as the years passed, some branches began to develop their own identities and agendas. The
Yeah, that's sort of like what we're dealing with. I think I have a mental picture of it all. I said it all comes out of World War II, and it was meant to be helpful so that we never had such a horrific, tragic thing that clearly traumatized everybody happen again. But then they're their own entities now. They're independent. And Kennedy tried to warn everyone, but he didn't realize that the media, because the speech, one of his last speeches, or maybe the last one he did, was he was pleading to the media to help him, that they were the only thing that could help with this. And they were already gotten because they own the media, basically. So, yeah.
Whispers, who specialized in psychological warfare, grew especially ambitious. Their work required whisperers, who specialized in psychological warfare, grew especially ambitious. Their work required them to manipulate not just enemies, but sometimes their own people. Over time, they began to see themselves not as servants of the state, but as the true architects of the empire's stability. Why should Chandragupta rule? They whispered among themselves, when it was their lies and schemes that held the realm together.
Yeah, and I think that's why no matter who's in charge, same stuff's going on, right?
Hands of justice, meanwhile, became consumed by their role. Originally tasked with eliminating external threats, they increasingly turned their blades inward, hunting down suspected traitors with ruthless efficiency. Some began to relish their power, using their authority to settle personal vendettas or intimidate rivals. Fear, once a tool to protect the empire, now threatened to tear it apart. Chanakya, ever vigilant, noticed these shifts. He tightened his grip, placing spies to monitor other spies, but this only deepened the paranoia. Agents began questioning one another, wondering who was truly loyal and who was secretly reporting to the master strategist. A culture of suspicion took root, spreading like poison through the network. The breaking point came with the betrayal of a ghost, one of the most elite and secretive operatives in Shanaka's entire system. The ghosts were chosen for their absolute loyalty, their willingness to vanish completely into the service of the state. Their identities were erased, their pasts destroyed. To become a ghost was to cease to exist as an individual and become a living tool of espionage. One such agent, known only by the codename Ashva, had served the empire for years without question. His missions were legendary, infiltrating enemy courts, staging assassinations that looked like accidents, even toppling a minor kingdom through a single whispered lie. To Chanakya, Ashva was the perfect weapon. But perfection breeds arrogance. Unbeknownst to his master, Ashva had begun to question the very system he served. Was the empire truly just, or was it simply another form of tyranny, enforced by invisible chains? These doubts festered until, during a mission beyond the empire's borders, Ashva was approached by foreign agents. They offered him something the Mauryan network never could: freedom. All they asked in return was information, a small betrayal, easily concealed. Ashva agreed. His first act of treachery was subtle, almost undetectable. A single piece of misinformation planted here, a delayed report there. But over time, his actions grew bolder. Entire operations collapsed because of his manipulations. Dozens of loyal spies were captured or killed, their missions compromised by a man they trusted completely. When Chanakya finally discovered the betrayal, it was too late. Ashva had vanished, disappearing into the vast lands beyond the empire. His name became a curse among the five shadows, a reminder that even the most carefully controlled system could be undone by a single crack. The betrayal of Ashva shook the Mauryan leadership to its core. Chandragupta himself, once seen as an almost divine figure, now appeared vulnerable. If even his most trusted agents could turn against him, what hope did he have of controlling the vast empire? To reassert his authority, Chandragupta staged a dramatic display of power. In the central square of Pataliputra, dozens of captured traitors, both foreign spies and internal defectors, were paraded before the populace. Their crimes were read aloud, their confessions extracted through methods best left to the imagination. Then, in a chilling spectacle, They were executed as a warning to all. The message was clear. The emperor still saw all, knew all, and would tolerate no disobedience. But while this display impressed the common people, it had a more complicated effect on the spy network itself. Some agents were reassured, their loyalty renewed by the emperor's decisive action. Others, however, saw it as a sign of weakness. If Chandragupta had to prove his omnipotence, perhaps he was not truly omnipotent at all. In the shadows, whispers of rebellion grew louder. In response to these growing threats, Chanakya initiated the most ambitious counterintelligence campaign in the empire's history. He turned the network inward, using its vast resources to root out disloyalty. Spies were reassigned, handlers replaced, entire branches restructured overnight. No one knew who to trust. In one particularly cunning move, Chanakya spread false rumors of his own death, observing carefully to see which agents moved against the state in the ensuing chaos. Those who revealed their true colors were swiftly eliminated. The operation was a success, but it came at a terrible cost. By pitting spies against spies, Chanakya had ensured short-term stability, but he had also deepened the divisions within his organization. The five shadows were now a network held together not by loyalty, but by fear. As the chapter closes, the Mauryan Empire stands on a knife's edge. Externally, it remains a vast and powerful force, respected and feared across the known world. But internally, its foundations are cracking. Foreign agents are growing bolder, slipping past even the most vigilant defenses. Internal factions are plotting in secret, their ambitions hidden behind layers of lies. Chanakya himself is haunted by doubts. He has built a machine of unparalleled complexity, but he no longer fully controls it. The very tools he created to protect the empire may now be the instruments of its downfall. Chandragupta, meanwhile, faces his own crisis of faith. Can an emperor rule a realm built entirely on deception? Or is he merely a figurehead, dancing on strings pulled by unseen hands? In the final chapter, the storm will break. Betrayals will come to light, the true enemy will reveal itself, and the fate of the Mauryan spy network will be decided. But as history has shown, when shadows fight shadows, there are no true victors, only survivors. The storm that Chanakya had long feared finally descended upon the Mauryan Empire. It began, as all great downfalls do, not with open rebellion, but with whispers in the dark. Across the empire, conflicting reports flooded in. Enemy forces massing on the western frontier, rebellion stirring in the southern provinces, secret plots forming within the royal court itself. But were these threats real, or carefully crafted illusions planted by foreign spies? The once fluid network of information was now a tangled web, with truth and lies indistinguishable. Even Chanakya, the master of manipulation, found himself blind, unable to separate reality from deception. For the first time, the empire's invisible army was not protecting it. It was paralyzing it. The very weapon that had built the Mauryan dynasty was now turning inward, slicing at its own foundation. As chaos spread, foreign enemies seized their moment. Among them were the Greek states to the west, remnants of Alexander the Great's fractured empire. For years they had studied Chanakya's methods, slowly building their own network of counter-spies and double agents. Now they moved with precision, planting operatives within every level of the Mauryan intelligence system. Their greatest weapon was not armies or swords, but disinformation. Fake messages were intercepted accidentally, suggesting uprisings that didn't exist or armies that weren't really marching. Entire Mauryan legions were sent chasing phantoms, leaving vital regions unguarded.
This is bringing up the quote from Sun Tzu that was saying, by knowing your enemy, you can keep yourself from being endangered in 100 engagements. This is what that is. It's they're being entangled into a bunch of engagements that are endangering themselves.
One particularly devastating ploy involved the city of Takshashila, a crucial hub on the empire's northwestern frontier. Reports claimed the city was on the verge of rebellion, its governors secretly plotting to defect to foreign powers. Chandragupta, desperate to prevent a revolt, diverted troops and spies to the region. But when they arrived, they found nothing. No rebellion, no plot. It had been a carefully crafted illusion, and while the emperor's forces were distracted, a real foreign army invaded elsewhere, seizing a critical trade route. This was not a simple failure of intelligence. It was a masterstroke of counter-espionage, a shadow war fought entirely with lies. As the external threats mounted, Chanakya made a chilling discovery. The deepest wound came not from outside the empire, but from within. The Whisperers, the branch of spies responsible for psychological warfare, had begun acting independently. For years, they had manipulated enemies and allies alike, spreading rumors and controlling narratives. Now, they sought to control the empire itself. Their leader, a cunning operative known only by the codename Naga, believed that Chandragupta and Chanakya were relics of a bygone era. The future, Naga declared, should belong to those who truly shaped reality, the masters of information. In secret, he built his own faction within the network, recruiting disillusioned agents with promises of power and freedom. When Chanakya confronted Naga, the encounter was chilling. "You taught us," Naga said, his voice calm, almost reverent. "You taught us that deception is power. That truth is merely a tool to be bent and reshaped. Did you really think we would not use your lessons against you?" The Whisperers launched a coordinated strike, feeding false intelligence to every other branch of the Five Shadows. The hands of justice were sent chasing traitors who didn't exist. The Watchers were ordered to guard locations of no importance. Even the ghosts, Chanakya's most elite agents, were deceived and turned against one another. Within days, the entire network collapsed into chaos. It was the ultimate irony. A system built to control others had been outmanipulated by its own creation. Realizing that the empire was on the brink of destruction, Chanakya took drastic action. He summoned Chandragupta to a private audience, urging him to abandon the collapsing network and rule through open strength rather than hidden manipulation. But the emperor, long accustomed to his illusion of omnipotence, could not accept such a retreat. To admit that his spies had failed would be to admit that his power had always been a facade. The argument between the two men was fierce and final. Some accounts say that Chanakya, realizing his dream had become a nightmare, chose exile, vanishing into the wilderness. Others claim he was assassinated by the very agents he had trained, a victim of the paranoia he himself had sown. Whatever the truth, his departure marked the end of an era. Without his guiding hand, the network shattered completely. Chandragupta, isolated and mistrusted, was left to face the empire's enemies with only his armies. Though he achieved some victories, the magic of Mauryan invincibility was gone. The myth had been broken, and with it, the empire's foundation. The Mauryan Empire did not fall overnight. For years, it lingered, a shadow of its former glory. The Five Shadows were disbanded, their surviving members scattered. Some became mercenaries, selling their skills to foreign kings. Others faded into obscurity, their secrets buried with them. But even as the network dissolved, its influence continued to ripple across the ancient world. Foreign powers eagerly adopted the techniques Chanakya had pioneered. Code systems, compartmentalization, psychological warfare, these concepts spread like wildfire, shaping the intelligence agencies of future civilizations. Rome, Persia, and even distant China would eventually build spy networks that owed their existence to the lessons of the Mauryan experiment. And yet, the original vision was never truly replicated. Chanakya's network had been unique, not just in its scale, but in its philosophy. It was a system built on the belief that knowledge itself is power, that the fate of empires can be decided not on the battlefield, but in the shadows. Though the Mauryan Empire eventually fell, that idea would live on, resurfacing again and again throughout history. Centuries later, historians would puzzle over the Mauryan Empire's sudden decline. Many focused on external factors: wars, economic strain, political unrest. Few understood the true cause: a war fought entirely in secret, where the combatants were invisible and the weapons were lies. The surviving texts of the Arthashastra, Chanakya's legendary...
So that, reminds me of how I was reading when I was doing my research for this video that there's a big missing link in a lot of the archaeology and historian types where they're not putting the intelligence aspects of all these different cultures together with the same storyline.
manual provide tantalizing glimpses of this hidden world. In one passage, he writes, A king's power lies not in his armies, but in the eyes and ears that move unseen. The sword kills the body, but the whisper kills the soul. Modern readers might assume this is a poetic metaphor, but for those who lived under the Mauryan spies, it was literal truth. A single rumor, placed in the right ear, could topple a dynasty more effectively than any army. The story of the Mauryan spy network is not merely history, it is a warning. Every empire, ancient or modern, faces the same temptation: to trade transparency for control, to believe that secrets can be managed without consequence. But as Chanakya learned too late, secrecy is a double-edged blade. The same shadows that protect a ruler can one day rise to destroy him. Even today, modern intelligence agencies operate on principles first articulated by Chanakya thousands of years ago. They gather information, manipulate perception, and wage wars that never make the headlines. But the fall of the Mauryan network reminds us that no system, no matter how perfect, is immune to corruption. In the end, the greatest enemy is always within. And so, the tale of Chandragupta, Chanakya, and their invisible army comes to an end. What began as a dream of unity and strength ended in betrayal and ruin. A lesson written not in stone, but in shadows. As you've journeyed with us through this hidden chapter of history, take a moment to reflect. How many events in our own time are shaped by forces we never see?
Exactly.
How many decisions are made by hands that never reveal themselves? The world may change, but the game of spies remains eternal. If this story has opened your eyes to the secret currents beneath history, like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Ancient Spy Files so you don't miss the next hidden saga we uncover.
Yeah, so if you want to subscribe to that channel or whatever, and I'll link that video in the description as well. So it's very interesting to hear that story. I know it was long and I couldn't speed it up because it was AI voice. So if you sped it up, it was very annoying. Sorry that was long, but I thought it was really interesting. And I thought that it made me have a lot of thoughts, that I might not fully have developed at this point, but, it just makes you wonder about things, especially with the stuff that I really like, that I'm into, which is geopolitics, foreign diplomacy, foreign policy, stuff like that, history in those areas as well. And so it just makes me have a lot of thoughts, and I feel like I do see a lot of the same remnants that was talked about in this video. And I sort of wonder, because that one video with the oracles, in the beginning of that video, if I remember correctly, that guy was talking about how Egypt fell and some people that left there brought the oracles to Greece. It's just really interesting because there was this whole civilization collapse in the Bronze Age of all those very advanced civilizations sort of like all at once. And there's a lot of debate in history about, or by historians and archaeologists, about what happened exactly. So there's a lot of different theories. And I sort of wonder if they should add intelligence to it, intelligence services, because maybe that caused something just like this where it deteriorates. I've always been on the theory that it was this vast series of things just over and over and over again that kept happening. Natural disasters, refugees, droughts, all sort of like happening one after the other over and over in a very short period of time. But I sort of wonder if Spycraft being added to that would change anything. But anyway, so moving on. So in conclusion of everything, so intelligence and spycraft has been around since the dawn of civilization. And while it's needed to maintain order and power and safety, it's clearly and obviously abused and used in nefarious ways. It may also be the leading cause of the downfall of civilizations when it becomes so corrupted that it causes blowback, such as the distrust of those in authority, destabilization, and overall moral decay of societies. It can obviously be dangerous once out of control, but without it, populations are left open to dangers of all kinds. There's a lot to think about on this topic and the ways we are currently being affected spy intelligence from not only our own country, but others as well, which is why I'm doing this series. Like I said in the beginning, I'm trying to bounce off the last video and pull the strings of things we talked about in there, and about how everything sort of stems from this trauma that everybody went through during World War II and the effects of it afterwards on foreign policy decisions, worldviews. And like I said, to pull some of the strings on the topics there that I wanted to, I felt like it might be too advanced and that we might need to build up concepts to have in our minds as we go through this series. And so, and get the basic ideas down and just move forward from there step by step. And we'll eventually make it up, like I said, to current operations being ran today, which I have lots of evidence on. And I also want to cover the Epstein situation and operation, because many people have no idea what that really even was. And they're all stuck unfocused on like one aspect of it and have no idea the bigger picture. And it's so deep and weird. And, we did find all this stuff out years and years ago, which makes no sense why nobody knows any of that stuff. So I thought might as well try to pull that information back up. And I have a lot of legitimate information on all that. That's pretty wild. So I made a chart that I have on screen for a recap of what we learned today. And so we've got our quotes. Intelligence is the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. Terminology: secret informant, the penetration agent, the disinformation agent, counterintelligence, double agents, psychological warfare, and subversion. Subversion is really important for us to remember. It's an attack on values and principles, sabotaging the established social order and its structures of power, authority, tradition, hierarchy, and social norms. And also attack on the public's morale. Who's doing this? Decision makers. Decision makers task an intelligence agency, and then does that intelligence agency eventually become independent and they become the decision makers? So that was what we were kind of a concept that we were going over there, a mental model, I like to say. The vast network of priests were the decision makers, with the oracles, which were a vast connected network of oracles all across the city-states of Greece and even beyond, and they were all connected, and that they appear to have been a vast intelligence operation that was using religion and superstition to manipulate the public into giving them money and information. Civilizations we learned about: ancient Syria and Iraq, Egypt, Persia, Greece, Rome, China, and India. Oh, and with the Oracle intelligence operation, they clearly don't want us to know about this, because the information, which I believe is like official stuff, but you can't find it anywhere, because, and the reason why I know that, remember, is because the Rising Tide Foundation, they know like texts and all the archaeology texts and all that stuff, and they just seem to know that. And then also the longest director of the FBI, Alan Dulles, also seems to know that. So very odd. And, they probably don't want us to know, just like they didn't want the people back then to know either. Famous literature: the Amarna letters, the Art of War, the Arthashtra. Plans moving forward: this is a series that's going to build upon concepts and mental models from each video, causing a string of knowledge that will culminate in learning about modern tactics, operations, geopolitics, the state of the world, and how we are possibly being manipulated. And also, hopefully, we can start building our pattern recognition skills too as well. Okay. I also added an article in the description box about women spies in the ancient world. It's a really good article. I thought it would be cool to give you guys something that you could go read on your own, and if you want, and that would be something neat that I could do for every video, possibly, if you guys like that. And so we won't go over it together, but it'll be in the description box for your own learning time. And well, that's the end of that video, and I'll see you next time on The Eclectic Journalist.
Thank you.